Not all ancient mysteries lie buried beneath the earth. Some stand in plain sight, daring us to understand them. The colossal statues of Abu Simbel temples are aligned so precisely that sunlight illuminates their inner sanctuary on specific days each year, while the massive stone platforms of Nan Madol rise from the ocean, constructed from enormous basalt blocks transported across water. In the deserts of Iran, the ancient wind towers of Yazd wind catchers reveal an advanced understanding of climate control long before modern technology. These sites blur the line between history and enigma, suggesting that ancient builders may have mastered techniques we are only beginning to rediscover. Hidden among the rugged granite formations of the Latmos Mountains, overlooking the quiet, reflective waters of Lake Bafa in western Turkey, the Yedila Monastery stands as one of the most hauntingly beautiful and enigmatic remnants of the Byzantine world. Unlike the grand cathedrals or well-documented monastic complexes of Constantinople, Yedila feels almost invisible, an abandoned sanctuary swallowed by time, silence, and stone. Its isolation is not merely geographical, it is psychological. To reach it even today requires effort, intention, and a willingness to step away from the modern world. And perhaps that is precisely why it was built there in the first place. The name Yedila, meaning the seven, immediately introduces one of the site's most enduring mysteries. Who were these seven figures? Were they saints, martyrs, or a symbolic representation of spiritual completeness in Byzantine theology? There are no definitive inscriptions that clearly identify them, no surviving texts that tell their story. Instead, their presence lingers in fragments, most notably in the faded yet remarkably persistent frescoes that still cling to the monastery's interior walls. These paintings, more than any other feature of the site, are the key to understanding both its purpose and its enduring mystery. What makes the frescoes of Yedila Monastery so extraordinary is not merely their age, but their survival. Painted sometime between the 9th and 12th centuries, these Byzantine artworks have endured in conditions that should have erased them long ago. The monastery has no protective roofing in many sections, nor its walls are exposed to humidity rising from the nearby lake, seasonal temperature fluctuations, and centuries of neglect. Yet, against all expectations, traces of color, form, and meaning remain visible. Reds, ochres, and deep blues, though faded, still outline figures that once dominated these sacred spaces. Faces, though worn and partially eroded, continue to gaze outward with a solemn intensity, as if refusing to disappear completely. The techniques used in these frescoes are themselves a subject of fascination. Byzantine artists typically employed a method known as fresco secco or buon fresco, applying pigments onto wet or dry plaster surfaces. The chemical bonding between pigment and plaster in true fresco techniques is known for its durability, but even so, the level of preservation at Yedila raises questions. How did these pigments withstand centuries of environmental exposure without the structural protection that other monasteries enjoyed? Some researchers suggest that the mineral composition of the local stone and plaster may have created a uniquely stable environment for the pigments. Others speculate that the specific organic or mineral binders used in the paints were of unusually high quality or crafted through techniques now lost to time. Beyond their physical resilience, the frescoes are deeply significant for what they depict and what they omit. Many of the figures appear to be saints or holy individuals, arranged in traditional Byzantine iconographic styles. However, there is a notable absence of clear labeling. In more formal ecclesiastical settings, Figures are often accompanied by inscriptions identifying them by name, and at Yedala, this clarity is missing. The viewer is left to interpret the identities of these figures based on posture, attire, and symbolic elements alone. This ambiguity feeds directly into the mystery of the seven. Are these the seven individuals referenced by the monastery's name, or are they part of a larger symbolic narrative now lost? Some scholars have proposed that the frescoes may represent a localized or even secretive form of religious expression. The Latmos region was known as a center for Hermetic monasticism, where monks sought isolation to pursue intense spiritual practices. In such an environment, artistic expression may have diverged from official Byzantine norms, becoming more personal, more symbolic, and perhaps intentionally obscure. If this is the case, the frescoes at Yedala are not just religious decorations. They are coded visual texts reflecting the inner spiritual world of a secluded monastic community. Another layer of mystery lies in the emotional tone of the artwork. Unlike the polished and often idealized figures seen in major Byzantine churches, the figures at Yedala carry a raw, almost intimate quality. Their expressions are less formal, sometimes more somber, even haunting. This has led some to suggest that the artists were not master craftsmen from urban centers, but rather monks themselves, individuals who painted not for public display, but as an act of devotion. If true, this would make the frescoes even more valuable, as they represent a direct, unfiltered connection to the spiritual life of the monastery's inhabitants. The placement of the frescoes within the architectural space also invites interpretation. Certain figures are positioned in areas that would have been visible only to those participating in specific rituals or standing in particular locations within the chapel. This suggests a deliberate design, where movement through the space corresponded to a spiritual journey, guided visually by the images on the walls. The monastery, in this sense, becomes not just a physical structure, but a carefully constructed environment for contemplation, where art and architecture work together to shape religious experience. Yet perhaps the most compelling mystery is not how the frescoes were created, but why they were left behind. At some point, the monastery was abandoned. There is no clear evidence of violent destruction. There's no signs of a catastrophic event that forced its inhabitants to flee suddenly. Instead, it appears that the site was gradually, or perhaps quietly, left behind. The frescoes, once central to the spiritual life of the community, were simply abandoned to the elements. Why would a place of such apparent significance be deserted without preservation or continuation? Various theories attempt to explain this. The decline of Byzantine power in the region, shifts in trade routes, environmental changes affecting Lake Baffa, or increasing political instability could all have contributed. However, none of these explanations fully account for the silence surrounding the site's abandonment. There are no detailed records, no narratives of decline, only the physical remnants standing in quiet defiance of time. Today, Yedala Monastery exists in a state of suspended existence. It is neither fully forgotten nor fully understood. Visitors who make the journey often describe a sense of stillness, as if the site exists outside of ordinary time. The frescoes, though damaged, continue to communicate something intangible, an echo of devotion, a trace of human presence that refuses to vanish entirely. In the end, the true power of Yedala Monastery lies in this balance between visibility and obscurity. It offers just enough detail to invite curiosity, but withholds enough information to remain enigmatic. The surviving Byzantine frescoes are at the heart of this tension. They are fragments of a lost narrative, resilient yet incomplete, beautiful yet haunting. They remind us that even in decay, there is persistence, and that sometimes the most enduring mysteries are not those that have been hidden, but those that remain in plain sight, waiting to be understood. Do you think the Byzantine frescoes at Yedila are telling a forgotten story? Or are they deliberately hiding a deeper secret? Share your thoughts in the comments below. At the narrow edge where the towering Caucasus Mountains descend toward the vast waters of the Caspian Sea, an ancient barrier rises, silent, enduring, and still not fully understood. The defensive walls of Derbent Twin Gates are not merely remnants of a forgotten fortification. They are the physical embodiment of a strategic idea so precise that it shaped the movement of civilizations for centuries. Built to seal one of the most critical geographic choke points in Eurasia, these walls transformed a natural corridor into a controlled gateway between north and south, between nomadic steppe cultures and the structured empires of the Middle East. For over a millennium, armies, traders, and migrating peoples all encountered this same obstacle: a pair of massive stone walls stretching from a hilltop citadel down toward the sea, forming what ancient sources described as the Caspian Gates. Yet beyond their visible scale lies a deeper mystery, one that continues to challenge historians, archaeologists, and engineers alike. Derbent's location is not accidental. It occupies one of the narrowest passages between the Caucasus Mountains and the Caspian Sea, a strip of land that in some places compresses movement into just a few kilometers. In ancient times, this corridor represented one of the only viable routes for large-scale movement between the Eurasian steppe and the fertile regions of Persia and Mesopotamia. The builders of Derbent did not need to create a defensive system from scratch. They needed only to complete what geography had already begun. By anchoring their walls between the mountains and the sea, and they effectively sealed an entire migration route. This was not simply a wall, it was a continental barrier. What makes this even more remarkable is how precisely the walls align with the terrain. They do not fight the landscape, they extend it. Every slope, ridge, and shoreline appears integrated into the design, suggesting a level of geographic understanding that was both practical and deeply strategic. Constructed primarily during the Sasanian Empire in the 6th century CE, the walls of Derbent were built using large, carefully cut stone blocks, fitted together with striking accuracy. Many sections remain standing today, their surfaces weathered but structurally intact, a testament to the durability of their construction. The twin walls themselves run parallel from the Narinkala citadel, perched high above the city, and down toward the Caspian coast. This dual-wall system created a controlled corridor, an enclosed space where movement could be monitored, restricted, or stopped entirely. What continues to puzzle researchers is the consistency of the masonry. In many places, the stones are fitted so tightly that even modern tools would struggle to improve upon the alignment. The walls maintain a remarkable straightness across uneven terrain, suggesting careful planning, advanced surveying techniques, and a disciplined workforce capable of executing complex designs over long distances. Among all the questions surrounding Derbent, none is more intriguing than the extension of its walls into the Caspian Sea. Archaeological evidence indicates that parts of the defensive system continue beneath the waterline, implying that the builders intended to control not only land access, but also maritime approaches. This raises a series of profound and unresolved questions. How did ancient engineers construct stable foundations in a marine environment? Building in water, even shallow coastal zones, requires techniques to manage shifting sediments, wave action, and structural stability. Today, such projects rely on advanced materials, heavy machinery, and precise engineering calculations. Yet the builders of Derbent appear to have achieved a similar outcome more than 1,500 years ago. One hypothesis suggests that the sea level during the time of construction may have been lower, exposing more land and allowing the walls to be built on dry ground. Over time, rising waters could have submerged these sections, creating the illusion of underwater construction. However, geological studies of the Caspian Sea indicate fluctuating water levels throughout history, and the exact conditions during the 6th century remain a subject of debate. Another possibility is that the builders developed methods to construct directly in shallow water, perhaps by creating temporary barriers, using stone-filled enclosures, or stabilizing the seabed with layered materials. If true, this would imply a level of engineering sophistication that is rarely attributed to the Sasanian period. There is also the question of intent. Extending walls into the sea suggests a strategic awareness of maritime threats or smuggling routes. It implies that the builders did not view the sea as a natural defense, but as another domain that required control. This level of comprehensive planning, land and sea, integrated into a single defensive system, is extraordinarily rare in ancient fortifications. Even today, underwater surveys have only partially revealed the extent of these submerged structures. Visibility is limited, sediment shifts over time, and much of the original construction may remain buried or eroded. What survives, however, is enough to confirm that the walls did not simply end at the shoreline. They continued beyond it, into an environment where ancient engineering was not expected to operate at such scale. This mystery remains open. Whether the result of changing sea levels, lost construction techniques, or a combination of both, the submerged sections of the Derbent walls challenge modern assumptions about the limits of ancient engineering. The walls of Derbent were not isolated structures. They formed part of a larger defensive network centered on the Narinkala citadel. Positioned on elevated ground, the citadel provided a commanding view of the surrounding landscape, allowing defenders to monitor both the corridor and the sea. From this central stronghold, the twin walls extended outward, enclosing a space that would become the city of Derbent itself. This integration of military architecture and urban planning is particularly striking. The city was not merely protected by the walls, it was embedded within them, functioning as both a settlement and a fortified zone. Such a design reflects a sophisticated understanding of defense in depth. Invaders who breached one section would still face multiple layers of resistance, in all within a confined space designed to limit their movement and expose them to attack. The sheer scale of the Derbent walls raises another set of questions. How were they built, and by whom? Transporting massive stone blocks across mountainous terrain would have required not only manpower, but also organization, planning, and sustained resources. The Sasanian Empire was known for its administrative capabilities, yet coordinating such a project in a remote and rugged region would have been a formidable challenge. Workers, materials, tools, and food supplies all had to be managed over extended periods of time. There is little detailed documentation describing the construction process, leaving historians to reconstruct it from physical evidence alone. The result is an incomplete picture, one that highlights the achievement without fully explaining it. The defensive walls of Derbent Twin Gates are often compared to other great fortifications, such as the Great Wall of China. Yet their significance lies not in their length, but in their placement. By sealing a single, critical passage, they exerted control over an entire region. For centuries, they influenced trade routes, migration patterns, and military campaigns. They were not just a barrier. They were a decision point, a place where movement could be permitted or denied, taxed or stopped. Today, the walls of Derbent still stand as a reminder of what ancient civilizations were capable of achieving when geography, strategy, and engineering converged. Yet for all that is known about them, the most compelling questions remain unanswered. How did their builders achieve such precision across such difficult terrain? How did they organize a project of this scale in a remote frontier? And most importantly, how did they extend their walls into the sea, creating a barrier that defied the limits of their time? These questions continue to echo through the stones of Derbent, inviting each new generation to look closer, think deeper, and reconsider what the ancient world may have truly been capable of. Do you think the sections of Derbent's wall extending into the sea are the result of changing sea levels over time, or evidence of an ancient construction technique we still don't fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The story of the Subashi Temple complex unfolds like a forgotten chapter buried beneath the shifting sands of Central Asia, a vast monastic city that once thrived on the edge of one of the harshest environments on Earth. Located near the ancient oasis city of Kucha along the northern rim of the Taklamakan Desert, Subashi stood as a major Buddhist center during the height of the Silk Road, when ideas, goods, and beliefs moved across continents with an intensity rarely seen before in human history. Today, only eroded walls and crumbling towers remain, yet these silent ruins hint at a scale and sophistication that challenge our understanding of how such a place could exist, and more importantly, how it could disappear so completely. Unlike a single temple or shrine, Subashi was an entire religious complex, where a sprawling network of monasteries, stupas, ceremonial halls, and living quarters. Archaeological remains suggest a highly organized urban layout, divided into eastern and western sectors by what was once a flowing river. This division is one of the first enigmas. Was it a natural consequence of geography, or a deliberate design reflecting symbolic or functional principles? The idea that ancient builders may have intentionally structured the complex around duality, perhaps echoing cosmological beliefs or practical separation of monastic functions, introduces a level of planning that feels strikingly advanced. The scale alone implies a large, stable population of monks and pilgrims, supported by systems of food supply, water management, and regional trade connections that are not fully understood today. But what makes Subashi even more perplexing is its location. The Taklamakan Desert is notorious for its extreme conditions: scorching heat, freezing nights, and relentless sandstorms. Sustaining a large religious community in such an environment would have required not only resilience, but precise environmental knowledge. The builders relied heavily on rammed earth construction, creating thick walls capable of insulating interiors from temperature extremes while resisting erosion. This technique, seen across other Silk Road sites, suggests a shared technological tradition. But at Subashi, it reached a scale that feels almost experimental, as if the entire complex was a test of how far human adaptation could be pushed against nature. Yet even the most advanced techniques could not fully shield it from the slow but relentless advance of desertification. Adding to the mystery is the striking absence of detailed historical records. While the renowned monk Xuanzang is believed to have passed through the region in the 7th century and described a flourishing Buddhist presence near Kucha, there is no definitive account that clearly outlines Subashi's foundation, peak or decline. This lack of documentation creates a paradox, a site of undeniable importance that somehow slipped through the written memory of the civilizations it once served. It raises the possibility that Subashi's significance was either taken for granted at the time or that its fall was so gradual and complex that no single narrative could capture it. Its proximity to the Kizil caves further deepens its importance. These caves contain some of the earliest known Buddhist murals in China, reflecting strong influences from Indian and Central Asian artistic traditions. Subashi likely functioned as a major hub in this cultural network, a place where monks, artists, and travelers converged to exchange not only religious teachings but also artistic techniques and philosophical ideas. If this was indeed the case, then the loss of Subashi represents not just the disappearance of a physical structure, but the collapse of an entire intellectual and cultural ecosystem that once bridged multiple civilizations. And yet, the greatest mystery of Subashi is not how it was built, but how it vanished. There is no clear evidence of catastrophic destruction, no widespread burn layers, and no signs of sudden invasion that would indicate a violent end. Instead, the site appears to have been gradually abandoned, its structures left to erode under the desert wind. This quiet disappearance is far more difficult to explain because it suggests a convergence of factors rather than a single decisive event. One of the most compelling hypotheses points to environmental change. The river that once separated the eastern and western complexes may have been the lifeline of Subashi, providing water for drinking, agriculture, and daily monastic life. If that river began to dry up due to climatic shifts or upstream changes, the entire foundation of the settlement would have been compromised. Without a stable water source, even the most resilient community could not survive for long. The expansion of the Taklamakan Desert over centuries may have gradually engulfed the region, turning once viable land into inhospitable terrain. In this scenario, Subashi did not fall. It simply withered, its population dispersing as the environment became increasingly unforgiving. However, environmental decline alone may not fully explain the abandonment. The Silk Road itself was a dynamic network, constantly shifting in response to political, economic, and geographical changes. Trade routes that once brought wealth and pilgrims to Kucha could have moved elsewhere, bypassing Subashi entirely. As traffic declined, so too would the resources needed to sustain a large monastic community. A reduction in patronage, fewer travelers, and diminishing economic support could have slowly eroded the viability of the complex. In this sense, Yi Subashi may have been a victim of its own dependence on a global system that was never stable. Religious transformation may have also played a role. Buddhism, which once flourished across Central Asia, gradually declined in influence in certain regions due to the rise of other belief systems and shifting political powers. If the local population or ruling authorities began to favor different religious traditions, the importance of Subashi as a Buddhist center would have diminished. Monasteries rely not only on physical infrastructure, but also on active communities of believers. Without that support, even the most magnificent religious centers can fall into disuse. There is also the possibility of political instability. Central Asia has long been a crossroads of empires, and periods of conflict could disrupt trade and displace populations and destabilize entire regions. While there is no direct evidence of a destructive invasion at Subashi, prolonged instability could have made the area unsafe or economically unviable, prompting a gradual relocation of its inhabitants. What makes the disappearance of Subashi so compelling is that none of these explanations fully account for the scale of the abandonment. Each factor, environmental change, economic decline, religious transformation, political instability offers part of the picture, but not the complete story. It is the combination of these forces interacting over time that likely led to the slow fading of this once thriving center. And because this process unfolded gradually, it left behind no clear historical record, only the silent testimony of ruins. Today, the remnants of Subashi stand as a haunting reminder of how even the most advanced and well-integrated human systems can dissolve into obscurity. Its crumbling walls and scattered foundations challenge us to reconsider the permanence of civilization itself. How many other centers like Subashi have existed, flourished, and vanished without leaving a trace in written history? And how many of our own modern systems, no matter how complex, might one day face a similar fate? In the end, Subashi is not just an archaeological site. It is a question about resilience, about adaptation, and about the fragile balance between human ambition and the forces of nature and time. Its disappearance remains unsolved, not because there is no evidence, but because the truth is likely too complex to be reduced to a single cause. And then perhaps that is what makes Subashi so enduringly mysterious. It reminds us that history is not always a story of sudden endings, but often of slow, almost invisible dissolutions that leave behind only echoes in the sand. Do you think the disappearance of Subashi was caused by a single main factor, or a silent combination of multiple forces we still don't fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Rising above the windswept edge of the Caspian shoreline, the hilltop citadel within the ancient core of Baku, known as Ichere, presents itself not merely as a fortified settlement, but as a layered architectural enigma shaped by centuries of adaptation, precision, and intent that still resists full interpretation today. At first glance, its elevated position appears to be an obvious defensive advantage, yet closer examination reveals a far more calculated relationship between terrain and construction, where natural slopes were not simply occupied, but deliberately integrated into a multi-tiered defensive system that maximized visibility, restricted access, and created controlled choke points that could be defended with minimal manpower. The outer walls, rising in thick, continuous lines, follow the contours of the hill with a subtle intelligence that suggests an advanced understanding of both structural stability and battlefield dynamics, while their stone blocks, cut and fitted with remarkable precision, raise ongoing questions about the tools, techniques, and organizational systems that made such consistency possible across different construction phases. Unlike many fortifications that reveal clear chronological layers, the citadel maintains a striking visual coherence, as if successive generations of builders were not improvising, but carefully adhering to an underlying logic that transcended time. Inside the walls, the spatial organization becomes even more perplexing. The narrow, winding streets of Ichere form a dense and seemingly irregular network that defies modern expectations of urban planning. Yet this apparent disorder may conceal a deeper strategic purpose. Pathways twist and narrow unpredictably, limiting visibility and slowing movement, creating an environment where unfamiliar intruders would be disoriented while inhabitants retained a tactical advantage. Structures of different functions, residential buildings, religious spaces, administrative complexes are interwoven so tightly that the boundary between civic life and defensive infrastructure becomes blurred, suggesting that survival within the citadel depended on a seamless integration of daily life and military readiness. Among these structures, the imposing palace of the Shivanshahs stands as a testament to political authority. Yet even this complex, with its courtyards and interconnected chambers, appears designed not only for governance, but also for controlled access and layered security, reinforcing the idea that the entire citadel functioned as a unified defensive organism rather than a collection of independent buildings. Yet it is within this already intricate environment that the most profound mystery emerges in the form of Maiden Tower, a structure that has resisted definitive explanation despite centuries of study and speculation. Unlike the surrounding architecture, which can at least be partially understood through known defensive or residential functions, the Maiden Tower stands apart, both physically and conceptually, its cylindrical mass rising with a solidity and proportion that immediately suggests significance beyond ordinary utility. Its walls, extraordinarily thick even by the standards of fortification, and create an interior space that feels more enclosed than practical, while the arrangement of its internal levels and openings does not align cleanly with any single known architectural purpose. If it were a defensive tower, its window placements appear inefficient for surveillance or archery. If it were a residence, its internal configuration lacks the comfort and accessibility expected of habitation. If it were a religious structure, its form does not conform to established patterns of sacred architecture in the region. This ambiguity has given rise to a wide range of theories, each attempting to reconcile certain features while inevitably failing to account for others. Some researchers have proposed that the Maiden Tower functioned as an ancient astronomical observatory, pointing to the alignment of certain openings and the possibility that its height and position offered a vantage point for tracking celestial events. Yet this theory struggles to explain the massive thickness of its walls and the absence of clear observational platforms. Others suggest that it may have been connected to Zoroastrian fire worship, serving as a temple or ritual space tied to pre-Islamic belief systems, a hypothesis supported in part by the region's historical association with natural gas fires. But again, the architectural details do not fully correspond to known fire temples. A more conventional interpretation identifies it as a defensive structure, perhaps a watchtower or last refuge, yet its design deviates in critical ways from typical military towers, particularly in its limited visibility and unconventional internal layout. What makes the mystery even more compelling is the possibility that the Maiden Tower predates much of the surrounding citadel, representing an earlier phase of construction whose original purpose was later obscured as the city expanded around it. If this is the case, then the tower may be a surviving fragment of a lost architectural tradition, one whose principles and functions were no longer fully understood by later builders, yet respected enough to be preserved rather than dismantled. This would help explain why the tower appears both integrated into and separate from the urban fabric of Icarishahar, as if it belonged to a different conceptual framework that was never entirely replaced. The question then becomes not only what the Maiden Tower was used for, but what kind of knowledge or cultural system produced it in the first place, and why that system left behind so few clear traces elsewhere. Adding another layer of complexity is the citadel's relationship with water, an essential resource that must have been carefully managed in a location defined by elevation and exposure. Archaeological evidence points to the existence of deep wells and possibly underground channels that ensured a stable water supply even during prolonged sieges, implying a level of hydraulic planning that is not immediately visible but crucial to the citadel's long-term viability. The integration of such systems into an already densely built environment would have required careful coordination, and are further supporting the idea that the citadel's development was guided by more than simple incremental growth. Instead, it suggests a continuity of knowledge, where each generation understood and maintained critical infrastructure without disrupting the overall balance of the settlement. Over time, the citadel absorbed influences from multiple civilizations, including the period of the Shirvanshah dynasty, as well as Persian and later regional powers, each leaving architectural and cultural imprints that contributed to its current form. Yet despite these layers, the site does not feel fragmented. On the contrary, it maintains a sense of coherence that is difficult to attribute solely to coincidence. Walls align with terrain in consistent ways. Pathways maintain their defensive logic. And key structures occupy positions that reinforce the overall system rather than disrupt it. This continuity raises one of the most intriguing questions surrounding the citadel: whether its design was the result of a long process of organic evolution that gradually converged on an optimal form, or whether there existed an original conceptual framework, a kind of master plan, that guided its development from the beginning. In this context, the Maiden Tower becomes more than just an isolated mystery. It becomes a potential key to understanding the entire citadel. If its original function could be definitively identified, it might reveal the priorities and capabilities of the earliest builders, shedding light on whether the citadel's layout was shaped by strategic foresight or by adaptation over time. Conversely, the fact that the tower remains unexplained may indicate that certain aspects of ancient architectural knowledge have been lost entirely, leaving behind structures that we can observe in detail but not fully comprehend in purpose. The hilltop citadel of Icirishahar thus stands not only as a physical monument, but as an intellectual challenge, inviting ongoing investigation into how ancient societies conceived, constructed, and inhabited complex urban environments in ways that continue to elude complete explanation. Do you think Maiden Tower is the product of a lost body of knowledge, or simply a structure that we are completely misunderstanding today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden deep within the dense forests and rugged ravines of central Italy, the Etruscan necropolis of Norcia emerges not as a conventional archaeological site, but as something far more unsettling and enigmatic: a silent city carved for the dead, suspended between stone and shadow. Unlike the grand ruins of Rome or the orderly cemeteries of later civilizations, Norcia feels almost deliberately concealed, as if it were never meant to be rediscovered. Here, entire facades of tombs are etched directly into towering cliffs of volcanic tuff, overlooking deep gorges that cut through the landscape like ancient scars. The setting alone raises immediate questions. Why choose such an inaccessible, perilous environment to construct a necropolis of this scale? And more importantly, how was it even possible? The site dates back to the height of the Etruscan civilization, a culture that flourished in Italy long before the rise of Rome, and yet remains one of the least understood civilizations in European history. Norcia appears to have been a major funerary center between the 4th and 2nd centuries BCE, though evidence suggests the area may have been occupied even earlier. What survives today is not a city of the living, but an architectural echo of one, a sprawling necropolis where the dead were given structures that mimic and in some cases surpass the homes of the living. Tombs are arranged in tiers along the cliffs, their facades resembling temples, complete with columns, pediments, and intricately carved doorways that lead not into bustling interiors, but into chambers of stillness and darkness. Yet the true mystery of Norcia does not lie solely in its symbolism or its haunting beauty. It lies in the sheer technical mastery required to create it, an aspect that continues to challenge modern understanding and remains one of the most compelling unsolved puzzles of the ancient world. The Etruscans did not build these tombs by assembling stones. They subtracted entire architectural forms from solid rock. Each tomb was carved out of the cliff face with remarkable precision, transforming raw geological formations into structured, symmetrical spaces. Flat surfaces, sharp angles, and balanced proportions appear throughout the site, suggesting not only skill, but a deep and systematic understanding of geometry and material behavior. This is where the enigma intensifies. The tools available to the Etruscans were relatively simple by modern standards, primarily iron chisels, hammers, and basic measuring instruments. And yet the results achieved at Norcia rival the accuracy of much later stoneworking traditions. Walls inside the tombs are often smooth and even. Corners meet at near-perfect right angles, and decorative elements maintain consistent proportions across multiple structures. In some cases, entire facades appear almost modular in their design, as if following a standardized architectural template that could be replicated with minimal deviation. This raises a critical question. How did they maintain such consistency across dozens, perhaps hundreds, of tombs carved into uneven and unpredictable cliff faces? Even more perplexing is the issue of access and construction logistics. Many of the tombs are positioned high above the canyon floor, requiring workers to operate on steep, unstable terrain. There is little to no surviving evidence of scaffolding systems, anchoring mechanisms, or lifting technologies that would have allowed ancient builders to safely reach and carve these elevated surfaces. Did they construct temporary wooden platforms that have long since decayed without trace? Did they carve from the top down, lowering themselves along the rock face as they worked? Or is there an entire aspect of their engineering approach that has yet to be recognized? The precision of the carving also suggests a level of planning that goes beyond improvisation. Before a single cut was made, the builders would have needed to visualize the final structure in 3 dimensions, accounting for the natural contours and weaknesses of the rock. A single miscalculation could compromise the integrity of an entire tomb. And yet structural failures appear to be rare, indicating not only skill in execution, but also expertise in geological assessment. The Etruscans seem to understand how the stone would respond to stress, how to distribute weight, and how to avoid fractures. Knowledge that implies generations of accumulated experience, if not formalized engineering principles. Inside the tombs, the mystery deepens further. Some chambers are simple, consisting of a single room, while others are more complex, with multiple interconnected spaces that mirror domestic architecture. Ceilings may be carved to resemble wooden beams, while walls sometimes feature recessed niches or carved benches, suggesting places for offerings or the symbolic presence of the deceased. The transition from exterior facade to interior chamber is often seamless, as if the entire structure were conceived as a single, unified form rather than a series of separate components. This level of integration is extraordinarily difficult to achieve, even with modern tools, let alone in antiquity. What makes this even more intriguing is the absence of visible correction marks. In many ancient construction sites, one can observe signs of trial and error, abandoned cuts, uneven surfaces, or modifications made during the building process. At Norcia, such evidence is surprisingly scarce. The carvings appear deliberate and confident, as though guided by a clear, and well-established methodology. This has led some researchers to speculate that the Etruscans may have used measurement systems or templates that have not survived in the archaeological record. Others suggest that their techniques were transmitted through highly specialized artisan groups whose knowledge was closely guarded and passed down through generations. The question of lost technology inevitably arises. While it is unlikely that the Etruscans possessed advanced machinery in the modern sense, it is entirely possible that they developed highly efficient manual techniques that have since been forgotten. The combination of tool design, working rhythm, and collaborative labor could have produced results far beyond what we typically associate with primitive technology. In this sense, Norcia challenges not only our understanding of the Etruscans, but also our broader assumptions about ancient engineering capabilities. Beyond the technical aspects, the necropolis also reflects a complex cultural and spiritual worldview. The effort invested in these tombs suggests that death was not seen as an end, but as a transformation, a continuation of existence in another realm. The architectural fidelity of the tombs to real houses implies that the deceased were expected to inhabit these spaces, to live in them in some symbolic or metaphysical sense. This belief system may help explain why such extraordinary resources were devoted to funerary construction, even in a location as remote and difficult as Norcia. And yet, for all its grandeur and sophistication, Norcia remains largely forgotten. Unlike more famous Etruscan sites, it has received relatively little attention. Yes, and much of the surrounding area remains unexplored. Dense vegetation covers many of the tombs, roots penetrate the rock, and entire sections of the necropolis may still lie hidden beneath layers of soil and forest growth. This raises the tantalizing possibility that what we see today is only a fraction of the original complex. How many tombs remain undiscovered? What artifacts, inscriptions, or structural innovations might still be waiting to be revealed? In the end, the Etruscan necropolis of Norcia stands as both a testament and a challenge, a testament to the ingenuity of a civilization that has largely vanished from the historical narrative, and a challenge to modern scholars to reconsider what ancient people were truly capable of achieving. Its silent facades, carved with astonishing precision into unforgiving stone, and continue to defy easy explanation. And perhaps that is its most enduring mystery, not just how it was built, but why its builders and their knowledge seem to have disappeared so completely, leaving behind only this haunting, stone-carved city for the dead. Do you think the Etruscans truly possess stone-carving techniques far beyond their time, or are we still missing a crucial hidden secret? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Across the vast, wind-swept deserts of eastern Jordan, far from the rhythms of settled cities and fertile valleys, lies a structure that feels less like a completed monument and more like a moment frozen in time. Casa Tuba stands not as a finished palace or fortress, but as an abandoned ambition, an architectural vision interrupted mid-creation. Built during the final years of the Umayyad Caliphate, likely under Caliph al-Walid II, this immense desert complex presents one of the most perplexing archaeological enigmas of the early Islamic world. Its scale suggests power, its design implies purpose, yet its incompleteness tells a story of sudden silence. From a distance, Casa Tuba appears as a sprawling rectangular enclosure stretching across the desert floor. Here, its massive outer walls, punctuated by semicircular towers that hint at both defense and display. Unlike other Umayyad desert castles, which often served as seasonal retreats, administrative centers, or caravan stops, Casa Tuba's sheer size suggests something far more ambitious. The layout reveals a symmetrical plan, with internal courtyards and divisions that could have supported a complex, multifunctional space, perhaps a royal estate, a military outpost, or even a proto-urban center intended to anchor control over the surrounding desert. And yet, as one approaches the structure, the illusion of completeness dissolves. Walls rise abruptly and stop. Foundations extend without continuation. Entire sections remain in skeletal form, as if the builders simply walked away and never returned. The construction techniques themselves deepen the mystery. The lower portions of the walls are composed of large, carefully cut stone blocks, providing structural stability and resistance against erosion. Above these, layers of mud brick were intended to complete the elevation, a practical adaptation to the harsh desert climate, where temperature extremes demanded insulation as much as strength. This hybrid construction method reflects both engineering sophistication and environmental awareness. The builders clearly understood how to balance durability with efficiency, and yet the execution remains unfinished, leaving behind a visible transition between permanence and impermanence, a boundary between what was meant to last and what was never realized. Perhaps even more puzzling is the location. Casa Tuba is situated in a region that today appears almost entirely inhospitable, arid, remote, and lacking in obvious water sources. Unlike other desert castles that were strategically placed along known trade routes or near seasonal water systems, Casa Tuba seems isolated. This raises critical questions about its intended function. If it were meant as a caravan station, where are the routes it was meant to serve? If it were a royal retreat, why choose such an unforgiving environment? Some researchers propose that ancient trade networks may have shifted over time, leaving Casa Tuba stranded in what is now an archaeological void. Others suggest that the site was part of a broader, still poorly understood network of desert installations designed to assert control over nomadic populations or to project imperial presence into the frontier. But all of these questions ultimately lead to the central and most compelling mystery: the abrupt abandonment of Casa Tuba. Unlike ruins that bear the scars of destruction, Casa Tuba shows no clear evidence of siege, fire, or catastrophic collapse. There are no layers of ash, no weapon fragments, no signs of violent interruption. Instead, the site conveys a different kind of silence. The silence of a project halted, not by force, but by decision, or by circumstance so sudden that it left no trace. Construction appears to have stopped at multiple stages simultaneously, suggesting not a gradual decline, but a coordinated cessation. It is as if the entire workforce vanished, leaving tools, plans, and progress suspended in place. The most widely accepted explanation links this abandonment to the political upheaval that marked the end of the Umayyad dynasty around 750 CE. The rapid collapse of the ruling authority and the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate would have disrupted large-scale state-sponsored projects, especially those located far from central power bases. Funding would have been redirected, priorities would have shifted, and unfinished constructions like Casa Tuba may have been considered irrelevant or even politically undesirable. However, this explanation, while plausible, does not fully account for the complete absence of reuse or reoccupation. Many other Umayyad structures were repurposed or modified under subsequent regimes. Casa Tuba, by contrast, appears to have been left untouched, and as if it had been deliberately forgotten. Alternative theories venture into more speculative territory. Some scholars suggest environmental factors, perhaps a sudden realization that the location lacked sustainable water access, making long-term occupation impossible. Others point to logistical challenges. The sheer scale of the project may have outpaced available resources, leading to an unsustainable construction effort that collapsed under its own ambition. There are even hypotheses that Kasatuba was part of a larger, incomplete vision, a network of desert complexes that, for reasons still unknown, was never fully realized. What makes Kasatuba particularly haunting is not just that it was abandoned, but how completely it was abandoned. There is no clear transition from use to disuse, no gradual adaptation, and no visible attempt to salvage or repurpose the site. It exists in a state of arrested development, a place where intention is visible, but outcome is absent. In this sense, Kasatuba is less a ruin and more a question, an architectural fragment of a narrative that was never finished. When compared to other Umayyad desert castles such as Qasr Amra or Qasr Karana, the contrast becomes even more striking. Those sites, though smaller, are complete, functional, and richly decorated, offering clear insights into their purpose and use. Kasatuba, by contrast, offers scale without clarity, ambition without conclusion. It challenges archaeologists not only to interpret what it was, but to imagine what it might have become. Today, as the desert winds move through its unfinished corridors and across its silent courtyards, Kasatuba remains one of the most enigmatic legacies of early Islamic architecture. It stands as a testament to a moment when vision exceeded reality, when power initiated a project it could not or would not complete. And in that unfinished state, it preserves something rare, not just the remnants of the past, but the uncertainty of it. What do you think truly caused the sudden abandonment of Kasatuba? Was it political collapse, environmental miscalculation, or something we have yet to uncover hidden beneath the desert sands? In the remote deserts near Nukus, far from the well-documented centers of ancient civilization, lies Mizdakan, a vast necropolis that challenges conventional understanding of time, decay, and human continuity. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than a scattering of ruined tombs and weathered structures rising gently from the sand. But as one moves deeper into the site, a different reality begins to emerge. Mizdakan is not simply a cemetery. It is a layered landscape of memory, belief, and engineering, shaped and reshaped over more than 2,000 years. Generations of people, separated by culture, religion, and era, return to this exact place to bury their dead, build new structures, and preserve something intangible that tied them to the land. The result is a city of the dead that was never truly abandoned, or only slowly absorbed into the silence of the desert. What makes Mizdakan especially intriguing is not just its continuity, but the physical nature of its survival. Unlike the monumental stone constructions of Egypt or Rome, nearly everything here was built from earth, sun-dried mud brick and clay, materials that should, by all expectations, dissolve under centuries of wind erosion, temperature extremes, and seasonal shifts. Yet many of these structures still stand. Some retain recognizable shapes, others preserve fragments of walls, arches, or domes, and a few even suggest the original architectural intent with surprising clarity. This alone presents one of the most compelling mysteries of the site. How has a city built from the most fragile materials managed to endure in one of the harshest environments imaginable? The answer may lie not in a single technique, but in a complex understanding of environment that ancient builders possessed, an understanding that modern observers are only beginning to reconstruct. The clay used at Mizdakan was not simply gathered and shaped. It appears to have been processed with careful attention to composition, possibly mixed with organic materials such as straw or plant fibers to improve tensile strength and reduce cracking. The bricks were formed in ways that allowed them to expand and contract with temperature fluctuations without immediately fracturing. Their arrangement within structures also suggests intentional design choices, thick walls that absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night, reducing thermal stress, and unrounded or sloped surfaces that deflect wind rather than resist it directly. Equally important is the way these buildings interact with the landscape itself. Mizdakan is not built against the desert, it is built with it. The positioning of structures appears to take prevailing wind directions into account, minimizing erosion on vulnerable surfaces. Some tombs are partially embedded into natural rises in the terrain, reducing exposure and stabilizing their foundations. Over time, sand accumulation may have even acted as a protective layer, burying and preserving lower sections of structures while leaving only the upper portions exposed. In this sense, what appears to be decay may actually be a form of preservation, a slow transformation that shields rather than destroys. Still, the durability of Mizdakan's clay architecture remains difficult to fully explain. Modern mud brick constructions in similar climates rarely last more than a few decades without maintenance, yet here we see remnants that have persisted for centuries, even millennia. This raises the possibility that ancient builders employed techniques that have since been lost or overlooked. Methods of curing, layering or compacting materials that enhance their resistance to environmental stress. It is also possible that the specific mineral composition of the local soil played a role, creating bricks that were naturally more resilient than those found elsewhere. Whatever the case, Mizdakan stands as a reminder that technological sophistication is not always defined by complexity or durability in the modern sense, but by adaptability and deep environmental knowledge. Beyond its material mystery, Mizdakan is equally compelling as a cultural and spiritual site. Archaeological evidence suggests that it was influenced by multiple belief systems over time, including pre-Islamic traditions and Zoroastrian practices, before becoming integrated into the Islamic world. This layering of religious identity is reflected in the diversity of structures, some resembling early mausoleums, others echoing forms associated with different funerary customs. The site's location along ancient trade routes, possibly connected to the broader network of the Silk Road, would have exposed it to a wide range of cultural influences, further contributing to its complexity. Local legends add another dimension to Mizdakan's mystery. One of the most enduring stories claims that the site contains the grave of Adam, the first human, making it a place of profound spiritual significance. Another belief holds that when a certain ancient tomb loses its final brick, the end of the world will begin. These narratives, while impossible to verify, reveal how deeply the site is embedded in the cultural imagination of the region. They transform Mizdakan from a physical space into a symbolic one, a place where the boundaries between history, myth, and belief become blurred. Despite its historical importance and unique characteristics, Mizdakan remains relatively unknown on the global stage. Large portions of the site have yet to be thoroughly excavated, and much of its story is still hidden beneath layers of sand and time. This lack of visibility has, paradoxically, helped preserve its authenticity. Unlike more famous archaeological sites that have been heavily restored or altered, Mizdakan retains a raw, almost untouched quality. It feels less like a museum and more like a landscape frozen in transition, where past and present coexist without clear separation. In the end, the greatest mystery of Mizdakan may not be any single structure or legend, but the convergence of all its elements. It is a place where fragile materials defy natural laws of decay where different civilizations chose the same ground for sacred purposes, and where human presence has persisted in subtle, continuous ways over thousands of years. The clay walls, shaped by hands long gone, still stand as quiet witnesses to a knowledge system that modern science has not fully recovered. And beneath the surface there may be even more structures, artifacts, or clues that could reshape our understanding of how ancient people lived, built, and perceived the world around them. Mizraim does not reveal its secrets easily. It does not rely on monumental scale or polished stone to impress. Instead, it invites a different kind of attention, a slower, more careful observation of materials, patterns, and persistence. In doing so, it challenges one of our most basic assumptions, that what is fragile must inevitably disappear. Here, in the desert near Nukus, fragility has endured. And that perhaps is the most extraordinary mystery of all. In your opinion, how have the fragile clay structures at Mizraim managed to survive for thousands of years in such a harsh desert? Was it a lost, ancient technique, or simply a result of environmental adaptation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The enigma of the Sanxingdui sacrificial pits stands as one of the most unsettling and intellectually provocative discoveries in the study of ancient civilizations, not only because of the sheer richness of the artifacts uncovered, but because of how profoundly they disrupt the expected narrative of early Chinese development. Hidden beneath the soil of Sichuan for thousands of years, these pits were first brought to light in the 20th century, revealing a ritual landscape unlike anything previously documented in East Asia. Thousands of objects, bronze masks with exaggerated, almost otherworldly features, delicate gold foils, jade implements, and massive quantities of ivory were found buried together, yet not in a state of preservation. Instead, they had been deliberately broken, burned, and interred, suggesting a form of ritual destruction that remains poorly understood. This alone would be enough to position Sanxingdui as a major archaeological mystery, but it is the presence of a particular class of artifacts, especially the monumental bronze tree, that elevates the site into a category of its own, forcing scholars to confront the possibility that a highly advanced and largely undocumented technological tradition once flourished here. At the center of this mystery rises the so-called bronze tree, an artifact that appears almost impossibly sophisticated for its time. Standing nearly 4 meters tall when reconstructed, the structure is composed of a central trunk supporting multiple tiers of intricately arranged branches, each populated with stylized leaves, fruit-like forms, and birds frozen in poised stillness. It is not merely a sculpture, nor simply a symbolic object. It is an engineering achievement that challenges conventional assumptions about Bronze Age metallurgy. The complexity of the tree lies not only in its size, but in the precision and delicacy of its construction. Each branch must be balanced against the others, each decorative element carefully integrated into a larger structural framework that remains stable despite its apparent fragility. The casting process required to produce such an object would have been extraordinarily demanding, involving the creation of multiple molds, precise control of molten metal, and a level of coordination that implies a highly organized and technically proficient workshop environment. What makes the bronze tree particularly perplexing is the absence of a clear developmental pathway leading to its creation. In most ancient cultures, technological innovation follows a gradual trajectory, with incremental improvements building upon earlier, simpler forms. In the case of early Chinese bronze work, for example, we can trace a progression from basic tools and vessels to increasingly elaborate ritual objects associated with the Shang dynasty. These objects, while impressive, adhere to a recognizable stylistic and technical lineage. The Sanxingdui bronze tree, however, does not fit into this continuum. It appears abruptly, fully realized, without obvious precursors in the archaeological record. There are no intermediate forms that demonstrate how artisans might have evolved from simpler castings to such a complex, multi-component structure. This discontinuity raises a fundamental question. Where did this knowledge come from? One possibility is that the artisans of Sanxingdui developed their techniques independently, driven by local innovations and a unique set of cultural priorities. The region's access to raw materials, combined with a potentially isolated environment, may have fostered a distinct technological tradition that diverged from that of the Central Plains. However, even this explanation struggles to account for the level of sophistication observed in the bronze tree. Modern attempts to replicate similar structures using traditional casting methods reveal just how challenging such a task would be, even with contemporary understanding of metallurgy. The precise alloy composition, the temperature control required to avoid defects, is the assembly of multiple cast components into a stable whole. All of these factors point to a depth of expertise that seems disproportionate to what we would expect from a culture without a long, documented history of metallurgical experimentation. Another possibility is that the bronze tree represents the surviving fragment of a much larger and now lost technological tradition. If earlier examples once existed but have not been preserved or discovered, then the apparent leap in complexity may be an illusion created by gaps in the archaeological record. This raises the tantalizing prospect that entire phases of human technological development may remain hidden, either buried beyond the reach of current excavation or destroyed by time and environmental processes. In this context, the bronze tree becomes not just an anomaly, but a clue, evidence that our understanding of ancient innovation is incomplete, and that civilizations like Sanxingdui may have achieved levels of sophistication that we are only beginning to recognize. The symbolic dimension of the bronze tree adds yet another layer of complexity to the puzzle. Many researchers interpret the structure as a representation of a cosmic tree, a motif found in various mythological systems around the world, symbolizing the connection between heaven, earth, and the underworld. The birds perched along its branches may represent spiritual intermediaries, while the vertical structure itself could signify a pathway between realms. If this interpretation is correct, then the technological achievement of the bronze tree cannot be separated from its ritual significance. It was not simply an object to be admired, but a central element in a broader cosmological framework, one that required both artistic vision and technical mastery to bring into physical form. This integration of symbolism and engineering suggests a society in which knowledge was not compartmentalized, but rather woven into a unified system of belief and practice. Surrounding the bronze tree are the other contents of the sacrificial pits, which together create a scene of deliberate and systematic destruction. The artifacts were not casually discarded. They were intentionally fragmented, burned, and buried, often in carefully arranged layers. This behavior stands in stark contrast to the preservation-oriented practices observed in many other ancient cultures, where valuable objects were passed down, stored, and/or buried intact as grave goods. At Sanxingdui, value seems to have been defined not by preservation, but by transformation, by the act of destroying material objects as part of a ritual process. If the bronze tree was indeed part of this ritual system, then its eventual destruction would have carried profound symbolic meaning, perhaps representing the dissolution of a cosmic order or the transition between different phases of existence. The broader context of Sanxingdui further complicates the picture. Despite the scale and sophistication of the site, there is a striking absence of written records associated with the culture that produced these artifacts. Unlike the Shang dynasty, which left behind oracle bone inscriptions that provide insight into its political and religious practices, Sanxingdui remains largely silent. This lack of textual evidence makes it difficult to reconstruct the social, political, and technological structures that underpinned the civilization. We are left to infer these elements from material remains alone, a process that inevitably introduces uncertainty. Yet even within this uncertainty, certain patterns emerge. The concentration of resources required to produce objects like the bronze tree suggests centralized control, while the uniformity of style across different artifacts points to a shared cultural framework. Comparisons with other ancient civilizations only serve to highlight the uniqueness of Sanxingdui. In regions such as Mesopotamia and Egypt, technological advancements are embedded within a broader historical narrative that includes written records, architectural continuity, and clear lines of cultural transmission. At Sanxingdui, by contrast, we encounter a kind of technological and artistic island, where extraordinary achievements appear in isolation, disconnected from both earlier and later traditions. This has led some scholars to propose that the site represents a parallel trajectory of development, one that was eventually absorbed or replaced by other cultural systems in ancient China. Others argue that the apparent discontinuity may be due to the limitations of current archaeological knowledge, and that future discoveries could reveal connections that are not yet visible. Ultimately, the bronze tree of Sanxingdui forces us to confront a deeper and more unsettling possibility: that the history of human innovation is not a smooth, continuous progression, but a fragmented and uneven landscape, marked by sudden bursts of creativity that may rise and fall without leaving a lasting legacy. The artisans who created the bronze tree possessed a level of skill and understanding that rivals, in some respects, that of much later periods, yet their achievements did not become part of the mainstream technological tradition. Instead, they were buried, literally and figuratively, beneath layers of earth and time, only to be rediscovered millennia later as a puzzle that we are still struggling to solve. In this sense, the Sanxingdui sacrificial pits are more than an archaeological site. They are a reminder of how much remains unknown about the ancient world. The bronze tree, with its intricate design and inexplicable origins, stands at the center of this mystery, and a silent testament to a civilization that reached remarkable heights of technological and artistic expression, only to vanish from the historical record. Whether its creation was the result of independent innovation, lost knowledge, or a combination of both, it challenges us to rethink our assumptions about the capabilities of ancient societies and to acknowledge that the past may hold far more surprises than we have yet imagined. Do you think the Sanxingdui bronze tree was the result of an independently developed technology, or the trace of a lost ancient knowledge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Rising above the rugged highlands of central Italy, the ancient city of Alba Fucins presents itself not merely as a remnant of Roman expansion, but as a site where the limits of ancient engineering blur into something far more enigmatic. And nowhere is this more evident than in its defensive walls, a massive stone perimeter stretching for nearly 3 kilometers. enclosing the city like a silent, enduring guardian that has resisted both time and explanation for over 2 millennia. And while the strategic placement of the settlement, at an elevation of roughly 1,000 meters overlooking the Fucino Basin, already suggests a calculated understanding of military advantage, it is the construction of these walls that transforms Alba-Fushans from a historical site into a profound architectural mystery. That's because unlike the orderly rectangular blocks and mortar-bound structures typically associated with Roman engineering, these walls are composed of enormous, irregularly shaped stones fitted together in what is known as polygonal masonry, a technique that at first appears chaotic, yet upon closer inspection reveals a level of precision so extraordinary that it challenges modern assumptions about ancient capabilities, as each stone, weighing in some cases several tons, has been cut into a unique, multi-angled form and then carefully placed so that it interlocks perfectly with the surrounding blocks, creating joints so tight that even today it is often impossible to insert a blade between them. And notably, this entire structure stands without the use of mortar, relying instead on the exactness of the cuts and the immense weight of the stones to maintain its stability, which immediately raises a fundamental question. How could ancient builders, working with tools that were presumably limited in precision and durability, achieve such an astonishing level of craftsmanship? Because to produce this kind of fit, each stone would have required meticulous shaping, not only along its visible edges, but across all contact surfaces, implying a process of repeated measurement, adjustment, and refinement that borders on mathematical complexity, especially when considering that these stones were not small, manageable units, but massive blocks that had to be transported, lifted, and positioned with incredible accuracy on uneven terrain. And yet the surfaces appear smooth, the angles deliberate, and the final assembly seamless, leading some researchers to speculate that the builders possess techniques that have either been lost or remain poorly understood, whether involving advanced knowledge of stone fracturing, abrasive finishing methods, or even systematic approaches to templating and fitting that have left little trace in the archaeological record. And beyond the sheer precision of the joints, the polygonal design itself introduces structural advantages that suggest a deeper, perhaps intuitive understanding of engineering principles, because unlike rigid, linear constructions that are prone to cracking along straight fault lines, the irregular geometry of these stones distributes stress more evenly across the entire wall, allowing it to absorb and dissipate forces such as seismic activity with remarkable efficiency, a factor that may explain why the walls of Alba-Fushans have endured repeated earthquakes that have damaged or destroyed later constructions in the region. And this resilience is not merely a byproduct of their mass, but a direct consequence of their design, indicating that the builders were not only skilled artisans, but also keen observers of how materials behave under pressure. And yet, despite these apparent advantages, polygonal masonry did not become the dominant construction method in later Roman architecture, which instead favored more standardized techniques such as opus quadratum and concrete-based systems, raising another layer of mystery regarding the origin of these walls. Because while Alba-Fushans is historically identified as a Roman colony, the style of its fortifications aligns more closely with a broader tradition of polygonal construction found in other sites across Italy, including Alatri Acropolis and Ferentino walls, where similar massive, precisely fitted stones form imposing defensive structures that appear to predate or exist outside the standard narrative of Roman engineering development, leading to ongoing debates among scholars about whether these walls were built by the Romans themselves, inherited from earlier Italic cultures, or represent a transitional phase in construction techniques that was later abandoned? And if the latter is true, then the question becomes even more intriguing because it suggests that a highly effective and sophisticated method of building, one capable of producing structures of extraordinary durability and strength, was somehow lost or replaced, leaving behind monuments that modern engineers can admire but struggle to replicate with the same elegance and efficiency. And as one walks along the surviving sections of the walls, tracing the contours of stones that have remained locked in place for over 2,000 years, it becomes increasingly difficult to view them as merely functional defenses, because they embody a level of intentionality and precision that transcends basic necessity, reflecting a culture or group of builders who approach construction not only as a practical task, but as a disciplined craft requiring patience, planning, and an almost intuitive grasp of geometry and material behavior. And when combined with the strategic positioning of the city, where the walls integrate seamlessly with the natural landscape, bending and adapting to the terrain in ways that minimize vulnerability and maximize defensive coverage, the result is a fortress that feels both engineered and organic, as if it has grown out of the mountain itself rather than being imposed upon it. And this harmony between natural and constructed elements further reinforces the impression that the builders possessed a holistic understanding of their environment, one that allowed them to exploit its advantages while reinforcing its weaknesses. And yet, for all that we can observe and analyze, the core mystery remains unresolved, because the tools, methods, and knowledge required to achieve this level of polygonal precision are not fully documented, and the absence of clear evidence leaves room for speculation, ranging from lost construction techniques to underappreciated capabilities of ancient craftsmen. But regardless of the explanation, the defensive walls of Alba Fushins stand as a powerful reminder that the past may still hold technologies and insights that have not been fully recovered, challenging the assumption that human progress is always linear and cumulative, and instead suggesting that certain forms of knowledge can emerge, flourish, and then disappear, leaving behind only their results, silent, enduring, and still beyond complete understanding. What do you think? Was this polygonal masonry a lost technology, or have we simply underestimated the true capabilities of ancient builders? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Rising dramatically from the rugged mountains of the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic in Azerbaijan, Alinja Fortress stands as one of the most extraordinary and enigmatic strongholds of the ancient world. A place where geography, engineering, and human ambition converge in ways that still challenge modern understanding. Often compared to distant mountain citadels for its breathtaking elevation and layered defensive design, Alinja Fortress is not merely a ruin of stone walls and terraces, but a complex architectural puzzle embedded into a near-vertical landscape, defying conventional expectations of what pre-modern builders could realistically achieve. From a distance, it appears almost unreal, as if the mountain itself had been carved into a fortress rather than the fortress being constructed upon it. And this illusion becomes even more striking when one considers the technological limitations of the eras during which it was built and expanded. The structure unfolds in tiers, climbing the steep slopes in successive defensive layers that transform the mountain into a multi-level bastion. Each level functioned not only as a barrier, but as an independent defensive zone, allowing defenders to retreat upward while maintaining resistance at every stage. Narrow pathways and stairways snake upward through the complex, forcing any approaching force into exposed, constrained routes where even a small defending group could hold off a significantly larger army. Historical accounts suggest that Alinja Fortress withstood prolonged sieges and served as a critical stronghold for various regional powers, all including during the campaigns of Timur, whose forces reportedly required years to finally subdue it. Yet while its military resilience is impressive, it is not the endurance of its defenses alone that raises questions. It is the very feasibility of its construction that remains the most profound mystery. At an elevation of roughly 1,700 meters above sea level, perched on sharply inclined terrain composed largely of exposed rock, Alinja Fortress occupies a location that appears fundamentally hostile to large-scale construction. The mountain slopes are steep, uneven, and in many areas dangerously narrow, offering little stable ground for staging building operations. Modern engineers, when confronted with similar terrain, rely on advanced surveying tools, reinforced scaffolding, motorized lifting systems, and precise logistical planning. Yet the builders of Alinja Fortress operated without such technologies, raising a central question that defines the site's enduring enigma. How was it physically possible to construct such an extensive and durable complex under these conditions? The transportation of materials alone presents a seemingly insurmountable challenge. Stone blocks, some weighing hundreds of kilograms or more, would have needed to be quarried, shaped, and then transported up steep inclines to heights where even walking without burden is difficult. Without wheeled vehicles capable of navigating such gradients, and in the absence of modern cranes or engines, the movement of these materials must have relied on methods that are either poorly understood or entirely lost. One possibility is the use of complex systems of ropes, pulleys, and wooden frameworks, carefully anchored into the rock face. However, no clear archaeological evidence has definitively confirmed the presence of such systems at Alinja, leaving researchers to speculate whether temporary infrastructure once existed and has since vanished without trace. Another theory suggests the gradual construction of pathways or ramps that allowed materials to be moved incrementally upward over long periods of time. These ramps, possibly made of packed earth, stone, or timber, may have been dismantled after construction was completed, either to prevent enemy access or simply due to erosion and time. Yet even this explanation encounters difficulties, as the steepness and irregularity of the terrain would have made the creation of stable ramps extremely complex. The question then evolves from how were materials transported to how were stable working surfaces created at all? A problem that touches on both engineering and environmental adaptation. Equally perplexing is the precision with which the fortress walls align with the natural contours of the mountain. Rather than imposing a rigid geometric structure onto the landscape, the builders appear to have adapted their design dynamically, allowing the architecture to flow with the terrain. This suggests not only a deep practical understanding of structural stability, but also a sophisticated ability to read and interpret the geological features of the site. Each wall segment seems to anchor itself into the mountain in a way that maximizes strength while minimizing the risk of collapse, even after centuries of exposure to weathering, seismic activity, and erosion. Such integration raises the possibility that the builders possessed empirical knowledge of rock behavior, load distribution, and long-term structural resilience that goes far beyond what is typically attributed to pre-modern construction techniques. The challenge of water supply further amplifies the mystery. Sustaining a population at such altitude, particularly during prolonged sieges, would have required reliable access to water. evidence suggests the existence of cisterns and rainwater collection systems, carefully positioned to capture and store precipitation. Constructing these systems on steep slopes would have required precise planning to ensure both efficient collection and minimal loss. Channels, reservoirs, and possibly filtration methods would need to be integrated into the architecture without compromising structural integrity. The presence of such systems implies not only engineering capability, but also an advanced understanding of hydrology, particularly in a mountainous environment where water flow can be unpredictable and seasonal. Moreover, the fortress was not built in a single phase, but appears to have evolved over centuries, with different cultures and rulers contributing to its expansion and modification. This layered history introduces another dimension to the technological mystery. How did successive builders maintain structural coherence while adding new elements to an already complex system? The ability to expand upward and outward without destabilizing earlier constructions suggests a continuity of knowledge, or at least a shared set of principles that guided construction across generations. Whether this knowledge was formally transmitted or developed independently by each group remains unclear, but the result is a remarkably cohesive structure that feels unified despite its long and varied history. The most compelling and unresolved aspect of Alinja Fortress lies in the intersection of all these challenges: transportation, construction, adaptation, and sustainability within an environment that seems fundamentally resistant to human engineering. While individual elements of the fortress can be partially explained through known techniques, their combination at this scale and in this context creates a level of complexity that defies simple answers. It is not just that the builders overcame one obstacle, but that they overcame many simultaneously, each requiring ingenuity, coordination, and resilience. This leads to a broader and more provocative question. Are we underestimating the technological capabilities of the societies that built Alinja Fortress? The absence of written records detailing the construction process leaves a gap in our understanding, one that is often filled with assumptions based on limited evidence. Yet the fortress itself stands as a counter-argument to those assumptions, suggesting that ancient and medieval builders may have possessed a far more advanced and practical knowledge of engineering than is commonly acknowledged. Whether this knowledge was widespread or unique to specific groups remains uncertain, but its existence is etched into the stone terraces that still cling to the mountainside. In the end, Alinja Fortress is more than a historical site. It is a challenge to modern perception, a reminder that the past may hold capabilities and solutions that have not been fully recognized or preserved. Its towering walls and winding paths invite not only admiration but also inquiry, urging us to reconsider what was possible in a world without machines, and to confront the possibility that some aspects of ancient engineering have been lost, leaving behind only the enduring evidence of their success. What technique do you think ancient builders used to construct Alinja Fortress on such nearly impossible terrain? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In the mountainous landscape of southern Albania, overlooking the Drino Valley near modern-day Gjirokastër, the ruins of Antigonia Archaeological Park lie scattered across a plateau, silent yet profoundly deliberate, as if time itself had paused mid-sentence. Founded in the 3rd century BCE by the ambitious ruler Pyrrhus of Epirus, Antigonia was conceived not merely as a settlement, but as a statement of power, strategy, and urban vision. Named after Pyrrhus's first wife, the city emerged during a period of intense geopolitical competition, positioned to control key routes through Epirus and beyond. And yet, despite its strategic placement, its apparent prosperity, and its sophisticated design, Antigoniae would vanish from history with an abruptness that continues to puzzle archaeologists and historians alike. At first glance, Antigoniae appears to follow the rational logic of Hellenistic urban planning. Its layout reflects a grid-based system, streets intersecting at near-perfect right angles, dividing the city into organized blocks that housed residential quarters, public buildings, and civic spaces. This was not a chaotic or organically grown settlement. It was planned, measured, and executed with intention. The geometry of the city suggests a level of surveying knowledge that implies not only mathematical precision, but also a deep understanding of terrain adaptation. The plateau on which Antigoniae sits is not naturally uniform, yet its planners managed to impose order upon it, aligning streets and structures in a way that balanced natural contours with human design. Even today, the faint lines of these streets remain visible and are tracing the outline of a city that once thrived with movement and life. But it is in the stone itself, silent, immovable, and enduring, that Antigoniae reveals its most astonishing secret. The construction techniques employed throughout the site represent a level of craftsmanship that borders on the inexplicable when considered in the context of available tools and technologies of the time. Massive stone blocks form the foundations of walls, terraces, and defensive structures, each piece shaped and positioned with an accuracy that leaves little room for error. These are not crude assemblages of roughly broken rock. They are carefully cut, precisely fitted elements that interlock with remarkable tightness, often without the visible use of mortar. The joins between stones are so fine that in many cases, even a thin blade would struggle to pass between them. This method of construction, sometimes compared to polygonal masonry seen in other parts of the ancient world, raises a series of profound questions. How were these stones quarried, transported, and shaped with such consistency? What tools allowed for such precision in cutting, especially given the hardness of the materials involved? And perhaps most intriguingly, what techniques ensured that each block would fit so seamlessly into the next, creating a structure that could withstand not only the passage of time, but also seismic activity and environmental erosion for over 2 millennia. Unlike later Roman construction, which often relied on concrete and standardized building components, the builders of Antigoniae appear to have worked with a more individualized approach. Each stone seems tailored to its specific position, suggesting a process that required foresight, planning, and a highly skilled workforce capable of executing complex tasks without modern measurement instruments. The absence of mortar in many sections is particularly striking, as it implies that stability was achieved through precision alone. Weight distribution, friction, and the careful balancing of forces would have been critical, indicating an intuitive or perhaps even formalized understanding of structural engineering principles long before such concepts were documented in written form. The durability of these constructions is, in itself, a testament to their effectiveness. Despite centuries of exposure to weather, vegetation growth, and human interference, many sections of Antigonia's stonework remain intact. Walls still stand, and foundations still hold, and the outlines of buildings are still discernible. This endurance suggests that the techniques employed were not only precise, but also deeply adapted to the local environment. The choice of stone, the orientation of structures, and the integration with the natural landscape all point to a sophisticated knowledge system, one that balanced aesthetic considerations with practical necessity. And yet this raises an even deeper mystery. If the builders of Antigoniae possessed such advanced skills, why is there so little direct evidence of their methods? No detailed manuals, no surviving tools that clearly explain the processes, no inscriptions that describe the techniques in use. The knowledge seems to have existed, been applied with extraordinary success, and then, in many ways, disappeared. Was it transmitted orally and lost over generations? Was it part of a specialized guild or class of craftsmen whose traditions did not survive the city's destruction? Or does it reflect a broader pattern in ancient engineering, where practical expertise outpaced written documentation? Beyond its stonework, Antigonia also offers glimpses into a vibrant urban life. Excavations have uncovered fragments of pottery, coins, and everyday objects that speak to a community engaged in trade, domestic activity, and cultural expression. Houses were organized along the grid, suggesting a level of social planning, while public spaces hint at administrative or communal functions. This was not a remote outpost, but a functioning city, integrated into the wider Hellenistic world. However, this life was not to last, and archaeological evidence points to a sudden and violent end. Layers of ash, signs of burning, and structural damage indicate that the city was likely destroyed during the Roman campaigns in the region, possibly by the forces of the Roman Republic in the 2nd century BCE. What is particularly striking is the apparent lack of reconstruction. Unlike many cities that were rebuilt, expanded, or repurposed under Roman rule, Antigonia seems to have been abandoned. Its streets fell silent, its buildings left to decay, its name fading from historical records. This absence of continuity deepens the enigma. Why was a city of such strategic and architectural significance not revived? Did its destruction coincide with a broader shift in regional power dynamics that rendered its location less important? Were its inhabitants displaced or assimilated elsewhere, leaving no community to rebuild? Or was there something about the site itself, economic, environmental, or symbolic, that discouraged resettlement? Today, Antigonia remains a place where questions outnumber answers. Its ruins do not simply represent the past, they challenge our understanding of it. The precision of its stonework stands as a silent testament to human capability, hinting at knowledge systems that were both highly effective and largely undocumented. The city's sudden disappearance serves as a reminder of how fragile even the most well-planned societies can be, and how easily they can slip from memory. In walking among the stones of Antigonia, one is confronted not only with what has been discovered, but with what remains unknown. Every carefully fitted block, every aligned street, every fragment of pottery is part of a larger puzzle, one that speaks of ambition, skill, and ultimately, loss. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not how Antigonia was built, or even how it was destroyed, but why a place of such evident sophistication could vanish so completely, leaving behind only stone, silence, and the enduring question of what we have yet to understand. If you were standing among the perfectly fitted stone blocks of Antigonia, do you think the real secret lies in lost construction techniques or in an ancient knowledge that modern humans still don't fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Perched high above the dramatic confluence of deep-cut canyons in what is now Lori Province, Lori Bird Fortress appears less like a conventional fortress and more like a structure that has grown directly out of the mountain itself. At first glance, it is easy to assume that its strength lies purely in its natural defenses, the plunging gorges carved by the Debed and Zoraget rivers, the sheer cliffs, and the narrow access routes that make any approach difficult. But the deeper one looks, the more it becomes clear that Lorry Bird is not simply a fortress protected by nature. It is a fortress engineered to become one with it. And at the heart of its enduring mystery lies a single question that continues to challenge historians and engineers alike. How did medieval builders achieve such a precise and adaptive construction in terrain that even modern efforts would find daunting? Unlike fortifications built on relatively flat terrain, where symmetry and geometric planning dominate, Lorry Bird rejects uniformity. Its walls do not follow straight, predictable lines. Instead, they bend, curve, and shift direction in response to the unpredictable contours of the land beneath them. This is not a flaw. It is a deliberate strategy. Each segment of the wall seems to respond to a specific geological condition: a protruding rock face, a sudden drop in elevation, or an uneven slope that would destabilize a rigid structure. And rather than leveling the terrain, a monumental task even today, the builders chose a radically different approach. They adapted to it. They allowed the mountain to dictate the form of the fortress. This approach required more than just practical decision-making. It demanded a deep understanding of structural balance. Large stone blocks were placed in ways that distributed weight unevenly yet effectively, compensating for slopes and irregular foundations. In some areas, natural bedrock was incorporated directly into the walls, not merely as a base, but as an integral part of the defensive system. This fusion of natural and constructed elements created a hybrid architecture, part geology, part engineering, that blurred the line between what was built and what was already there. The masonry itself presents another layer of intrigue. The stones, often large and irregular in shape, were fitted together with remarkable precision. In many sections, the gaps between them are minimal, suggesting a level of craftsmanship that goes beyond basic construction. This is particularly puzzling given the logistical challenges involved. Transporting heavy stone blocks up steep, unstable terrain without modern machinery would have required not only manpower, but also sophisticated planning. Ramps, pulleys, or temporary scaffolding systems may have been used, yet no clear evidence of such infrastructure remains. The absence of these traces leaves open the possibility that techniques now lost to time were once employed here. Even more striking is how the walls maintain their stability despite the lack of uniformity. In traditional fortification design, consistency is key to ensuring structural integrity. At Lorry Bird, however, stability emerges from controlled irregularity. The walls are thicker where the terrain is weaker and thinner where natural rock provides support. Angles shift subtly to counteract gravitational forces on sloped surfaces. It is as if the builders were not imposing order onto chaos, but negotiating with it, finding equilibrium in a constantly changing landscape. This adaptive strategy extends beyond the walls themselves. The internal layout of the fortress reflects the same philosophy. Instead of rigid grids or symmetrical plans, the structures within Lorry Bird are arranged according to the available space, thus often following the contours of the terrain. Buildings appear staggered, terraces emerge where the land allows, and pathways wind organically rather than adhering to straight lines. This creates the impression of a living environment, one that evolved alongside the terrain, rather than being forced upon it. And yet, for all its apparent logic, this method of construction raises profound questions. How did the builders plan such a complex structure without the benefit of modern surveying tools? How did they ensure long-term stability in an environment prone to erosion, landslides, and seismic activity? The answers may lie in empirical knowledge, generations of accumulated experience passed down through practice rather than written theory. Yes, but even this explanation feels incomplete when confronted with the precision visible in the surviving ruins. The mystery deepens when considering the time period in which Lorry Bird was constructed. Built in the 11th century, during the rule of David I of the Kingdom of Tashir-Zoraget, the fortress belongs to a world where engineering knowledge was often localized and limited by available tools. Yet the techniques observed here suggest a level of sophistication that challenges these assumptions. It implies either a highly advanced local tradition of construction or the exchange of knowledge across regions in ways that are not fully documented. Beyond its engineering, Lorry Bird also functioned as a self-contained settlement. Within its walls were residential spaces, storage facilities, and possibly religious structures, all integrated into the same challenging terrain. This raises another layer of complexity: the need to balance defensive strength with livability. Water systems, for example, had to be carefully designed to collect and store rainwater or channel it from distant sources. In a location where direct access to rivers was impossible due to the surrounding cliffs, such systems would have been essential for survival during sieges. Yet the exact mechanisms remain only partially understood, with archaeological evidence hinting at solutions but not fully revealing them. Despite its strategic advantages and architectural ingenuity, Lorry Bird did not endure as a major center of power. Its history fades into obscurity, leaving behind fragments rather than a continuous narrative. No, this disappearance is perhaps the most enigmatic aspect of all. A fortress so well adapted to its environment, so carefully constructed to resist both natural and human threats, seems unlikely to have been abandoned without significant cause. And yet the reasons remain uncertain, lost in the gaps of historical record. Today, what remains of Lorry Bird stands as both a testament and a question. It demonstrates what was possible when builders chose to work with the land rather than against it, when adaptation replaced domination as the guiding principle of construction. At the same time, it challenges modern assumptions about the limits of medieval engineering. The fortress does not simply tell a story of defense or survival. It tells a story of negotiation between human ambition and natural constraint. A story written in stone that continues to resist full interpretation. In the end, Lorry Bird Fortress is not just a relic of the past. It is a puzzle, a place where every wall, every curve, and every embedded stone invites a closer look, asking us to reconsider what ancient builders truly knew and how much of that knowledge has quietly slipped beyond our reach. Do you think the construction techniques at Lorry Bird were purely based on accumulated experience, or did there once exist a system of advanced knowledge that has now been completely lost? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Rising quietly from a small island off the southern coast of Tanzania, the ruins of Songo Manara appear at first like the remains of a forgotten settlement, shaped by time and tide. But as the outlines of coral-built walls begin to emerge from the landscape, it becomes clear that this was once a carefully planned, highly sophisticated urban center, one that thrived briefly during the 14th and 15th centuries as part of the wider Swahili world connected to the vast Indian Ocean trade network. Unlike many ancient cities that evolved over centuries and bear the marks of constant rebuilding, Songo Manara feels almost frozen, as if a single chapter of history was preserved intact. Within its layout of mosques, courtyard houses, and open spaces lies not only a record of social life, commerce, and religion, but also a deeper, a more elusive mystery: how such a place was constructed, sustained, and ultimately abandoned in such a short span of time. At the heart of this mystery is the city's most defining feature: its construction entirely from coral stone. This was not a material casually chosen, but one that reflects an extraordinary adaptation to the coastal environment. The builders of Songo Menara exploited the natural properties of coral in a way that suggests both empirical knowledge and refined technique. Coral, when freshly cut from reef formations, is relatively soft and workable, allowing it to be shaped into blocks using simple tools. Once exposed to air, however, it hardens significantly, forming a durable building material capable of withstanding structural stress. The people of Songo Menara mastered this transformation, quarrying coral from the surrounding marine environment, transporting it inland, and assembling it into complex architectural forms that have endured for centuries, despite constant exposure to humidity, salt, and erosion. What makes this even more remarkable is the scale and consistency of its use. Entire neighborhoods, walls, doorways, arches, and even decorative niches were constructed from coral blocks, often fitted together with a precision that challenges assumptions about technological limitations in pre-modern East Africa. Mortar, made from lime, itself derived from burned coral, was used to bind the stones, creating a cohesive and resilient structure. This closed-loop use of marine material, harvesting coral, transforming it chemically, and reintegrating it into architecture, reveals a level of environmental engineering that is both efficient and sustainable. It suggests a deep understanding of local resources, not just in terms of availability, but in terms of behavior over time. Yet this raises a series of unresolved questions. How did the builders coordinate such large-scale extraction of coral without destabilizing the very reefs they depended on? What tools allowed them to cut and shape blocks with such regularity? And perhaps most puzzling of all, how were these materials transported and assembled with such consistency across the entire city? There is little archaeological evidence of advanced metal toolkits or heavy machinery, yet the finished structures display straight alignments, stable foundations, and carefully proportioned spaces. In some cases, walls remain upright after more than 500 years, despite being subjected to tropical storms and the corrosive effects of sea air. This durability is not accidental. It is the result of a system that worked with the environment rather than against it. The architecture itself further reinforces this idea of environmental adaptation. The walls of Songo Menara's buildings are notably thick, providing natural insulation against the intense coastal heat. Courtyard-centered house designs allowed for controlled airflow, creating cooler interior spaces without the need for artificial ventilation. Openings such as doorways and windows were strategically positioned to capture sea breezes while minimizing direct exposure to sunlight. These design choices suggest that the builders were not only concerned with structural integrity, but also with comfort and livability in a challenging climate. The city, in this sense, was not just constructed, it was tuned to its environment. Beyond individual buildings, the urban layout of Songo Menara reveals an even more sophisticated level of planning. Residential areas, religious structures, and communal spaces were arranged in a way that balanced accessibility with privacy. Mosques were distributed throughout the city, ensuring that religious life remained central and accessible, while larger, more elaborate residences indicate the presence of social hierarchy and wealth concentration. Pathways and open areas were carefully integrated, allowing movement through the city without disrupting its internal organization. All of this was achieved using the same coral-based construction techniques, reinforcing the idea that a single material system underpinned the entire urban fabric. And yet, despite this apparent mastery, Songo Menara was short-lived. Within roughly 150 years, the city was abandoned. There is no clear evidence of destruction, no widespread burning, no collapsed defensive structures, no mass graves suggesting conflict. Instead, the site appears to have been left behind with an almost deliberate stillness. Artifacts remain where they were last used. Coins have been found buried within floors, and the arrangement of rooms suggests that daily life was interrupted rather than gradually phased out. This sudden departure stands in stark contrast to the effort invested in constructing the city in the first place. The theories attempting to explain this abandonment often point to broader changes in the Indian Ocean trade network, shifts in political power within the Kilwa Sultanate, or environmental factors such as changing sea levels or resource depletion. But none of these explanations fully account for the speed and completeness of the city's desertion. If trade declined, why were valuable goods left behind? If political instability played a role, where are the signs of conflict? And if environmental changes made the location uninhabitable, how did such a carefully adapted system fail so quickly? In many ways, the coral stone itself becomes a silent witness to this mystery. It holds the imprint of human intention. The careful cuts, the aligned surfaces, are the repeated forms, but it does not reveal the decisions that led to the city's rise or fall. Instead, it stands as evidence of a moment in time when a community achieved a remarkable balance between material, environment, and design. That balance, once lost, was never fully recovered in the same form. Comparisons with nearby sites, such as Kilwa Kisiwani, highlight both similarities and differences within the Swahili world. While Kilwa Kisiwani developed into a larger and more politically dominant center, Songo Menara offers something rarer, a snapshot of urban life preserved with minimal later alteration. Its relatively short occupation means that its structures were not repeatedly rebuilt or modified, allowing archaeologists to study a coherent architectural and social system rather than a layered accumulation of changes. And in this sense, Songo Menara is less a ruin and more a record, a physical document written in coral stone. Today, as researchers continue to study the site, new technologies such as ground-penetrating radar and detailed material analysis are beginning to shed light on aspects of construction and daily life that were previously invisible. But even as data accumulates, the core mystery remains intact. How did a society without industrial tools achieve such precision and durability using a material as fragile and unpredictable as coral? And why did a city built with such care and intelligence vanish so abruptly? Songo Menara challenges modern assumptions about technological progress. It suggests that innovation does not always follow a linear path, and that sophisticated solutions can emerge from deep familiarity with local environments rather than from complex machinery. The coral stone walls, weathered but still standing, are not just remnants of a lost city. They are proof of a knowledge system that understood how to build in harmony with nature. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not how Songo Menara was built, but why such knowledge, once perfected, was allowed to disappear. What do you think caused such an advanced system of construction knowledge at Songo Menara to completely disappear? Was it environmental change, economic shifts, or something history has never recorded? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Babak Castle rises from the rugged mountains of northwestern Iran like a vision carved directly out of stone. a fortress so dramatically positioned that it appears less constructed than discovered, as if ancient builders merely revealed what the mountain had always intended to become. Perched at an elevation of over 2,300 meters above sea level, surrounded by steep ravines, dense fog, and near-vertical cliffs, Babak Castle stands as one of the most formidable defensive strongholds of the ancient world, not simply because of its walls, but because of the terrain itself, which functions as an extension of its architecture. From a distance, the fortress seems unreachable, its silhouette merging with jagged ridgelines and shifting clouds, creating an illusion that it belongs more to myth than to history. And yet archaeological evidence confirms that it was very real and once served as the stronghold of Babak Khorramdin, a rebel leader who resisted the powerful Abbasid Caliphate for nearly 2 decades in the 9th century. The very fact that such a prolonged resistance was possible from this isolated mountain fortress raises immediate questions, not only about military strategy, but about the deeper engineering intelligence embedded within the structure itself. Approaching Babak Castle is an experience that immediately reveals its defensive genius, as the only accessible path to the summit is a narrow, winding trail that snakes along the mountain's edge, at times barely wide enough for a single person to pass, forcing any approaching force into a vulnerable, elongated formation. This path is not merely a natural feature, but appears to have been deliberately integrated into the fortress's defensive design, transforming the landscape into a controlled corridor where movement could be monitored, slowed, and easily targeted. Unlike traditional fortifications built on plains or gentle elevations, Babak Castle does not rely on massive outer walls alone. Instead, it uses the mountain itself as its primary shield, reducing the need for extensive artificial barriers while maximizing natural protection. This synergy between architecture and environment suggests a level of planning that goes far beyond simple construction, pointing instead to a deep understanding of geography, materials, and human behavior in combat scenarios. Historically, the fortress is inseparable from the legend of Babak Khorramdin, whose rebellion against Abbasid authority turned this remote stronghold into a symbol of resistance and endurance. For nearly 20 years, Babak and his followers managed to withstand repeated assaults, a feat that cannot be explained by courage alone. The fortress's design played a critical role, allowing a relatively small force to defend against a much larger army by exploiting elevation, visibility, and restricted access points. Attackers would have been forced to ascend the treacherous path under constant observation, exposed to projectiles and ambushes, while defenders, positioned at higher levels, could conserve energy and resources. The longer the siege continued, the more the mountain itself became an ally to those inside, turning what might have been a disadvantage, its isolation, into a strategic advantage. Yet beyond its military history, what makes Babak Castle truly extraordinary is the way it was constructed in harmony with one of the most unforgiving landscapes imaginable. The walls and structures do not follow a standardized geometric plan. Instead, they adapt fluidly to the contours of the mountain, bending, rising, and anchoring themselves into uneven rock surfaces with remarkable precision. In some sections, the boundary between natural rock and human-built wall becomes almost indistinguishable, suggesting that builders carefully selected, shaped, and integrated existing formations rather than attempting to dominate them. This approach not only reduced the amount of material required, but also increased structural stability, as the fortress effectively became part of the mountain rather than something placed upon it. And such a technique implies a sophisticated understanding of load distribution, erosion patterns, and long-term durability, knowledge that is difficult to fully reconstruct today. Inside the fortress, evidence points to a surprisingly complex system designed to support long-term habitation in an otherwise inhospitable environment. Remains of cisterns indicate that rainwater was collected and stored, ensuring a reliable supply during sieges, while storage areas suggest that food could be preserved for extended periods. Living quarters, though now in ruins, hint at an organized internal layout that balanced defense with daily life. This raises another layer of mystery. Sustaining a community at such altitude, under constant threat, would have required careful planning, resource management, and perhaps even psychological resilience shaped by the environment itself. The fortress was not merely a military installation. It was a self-contained world suspended above the surrounding valleys. However, the most profound mystery of Babak Castle lies in what can only be described as its seemingly impossible construction. Building at such altitude and on such treacherous terrain presents challenges that remain significant even with modern technology. The transportation of heavy stones, tools, and supplies up steep, narrow paths would have required extraordinary coordination and ingenuity. There are no clear records detailing the methods used, leaving researchers to speculate about the techniques employed. One possibility is the use of temporary scaffolding systems anchored into the rock, which combined with ropes and pulleys to gradually lift materials upward. Another theory suggests that construction may have been carried out incrementally from multiple directions, with workers carving pathways and platforms into the mountain as they progressed. Yet even these explanations struggle to account for the precision with which the structures align with the natural contours of the terrain. The concept of building with the mountain rather than building on the mountain may be the key to understanding this mystery, but it also raises further questions. How did ancient builders survey such a complex and dangerous landscape with enough accuracy to plan their construction? Without modern instruments, achieving the necessary measurements and alignments would have required highly developed observational techniques, and possibly involving simple but effective tools combined with accumulated experience passed down through generations. The choice of materials also reflects a strategic awareness of local conditions, as stones were likely sourced from the immediate surroundings, reducing the need for long-distance transport while ensuring compatibility with the existing geological structure. Moreover, the durability of Babak Castle over centuries of exposure to harsh weather, freezing temperatures, strong winds, and seismic activity suggests that its builders anticipated these challenges and incorporated solutions into their design. The way the walls interlock with the rock, the distribution of weight across uneven surfaces, and the use of natural barriers all contribute to a resilience that continues to impress modern observers. It is not simply that the fortress has survived, it is that it has done so in a location where survival itself seems improbable. In many ways, Babak Castle represents a convergence of necessity and innovation, where the demands of survival in a hostile environment drove the development of techniques that appear remarkably advanced. It challenges conventional narratives about the limitations of ancient engineering, demonstrating that under the right conditions, human ingenuity can produce solutions that rival and sometimes surpass modern expectations. The fortress is not just a relic of the past, but a reminder that knowledge is often shaped by context, and that the absence of written records does not equate to the absence of sophistication. Today, as visitors make the arduous journey to its summit, as they retrace a path that has tested countless others across centuries, experiencing firsthand the isolation, the danger, and the breathtaking beauty that define Babak Castle. Standing among its ruins, surrounded by endless mountain ranges and drifting clouds, one cannot help but feel that the true mystery of this place is not only how it was built, but why such an extraordinary effort was undertaken in the first place. Was it purely strategic, or did the location hold symbolic significance as well? Did the builders see the mountain as a fortress waiting to be realized, or as a challenge to be conquered? These questions remain open, and perhaps that is what makes Babak Castle so compelling. It exists at the intersection of history and enigma, where every stone seems to carry both an answer and a deeper question. Above all, at the mystery of its construction, how ancient engineers managed to transform an almost inaccessible peak into a functioning, resilient stronghold, continues to defy simple explanation. It invites us to reconsider what was possible in the ancient world and to acknowledge that some achievements, even when standing before us, remain just beyond the full reach of our understanding. What do you think was the true reason ancient people built Babak Castle on an almost unreachable mountain? Military strategy or a deeper hidden purpose? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Deep within the rolling plains of northeastern Bulgaria, inside the vast archaeological complex of Zborjanovo Archaeological Reserve, lies one of the most enigmatic burial sites ever uncovered in Europe. Known today through its most iconic structure, the Sveshtari tomb, this Thracian funerary monument is believed to date back to the 3rd century BCE and is often associated with the Getai, a powerful Thracian tribe described by ancient Greek historians as both fierce warriors and deeply spiritual people. Yet, beyond its historical attribution, Zborjanovo presents something far more compelling, a convergence of architecture, symbolism, and engineering that challenges conventional assumptions about what so-called peripheral ancient cultures were capable of achieving. From the moment of its discovery, as archaeologists recognized that this was not simply a burial site, but a carefully orchestrated environment where geometry, ritual, and construction precision intersect in ways that remain only partially understood. At first glance, the tomb appears to follow a familiar Thracian layout, consisting of a corridor leading into a central burial chamber covered by a dome. However, this structural simplicity is immediately complicated by the presence of sculptural and decorative elements that strongly resemble classical Greek influences, particularly the use of caryatids, female figures sculpted in relief, positioned as if they are supporting the weight of the ceiling. Yet these figures deviate significantly from their Greek counterparts. Their proportions are subtly distorted, their expressions unusually solemn and almost otherworldly, and when their posture suggests a ritualistic function rather than purely aesthetic intent. This blending of styles is not merely artistic borrowing. It suggests the emergence of a distinct architectural language that integrates external influence into a deeply localized symbolic system. Rather than copying Greek forms, the Thracians appear to have transformed them, embedding them into a spiritual framework that remains largely undocumented due to the near-total absence of written Thracian records. Inside the burial chamber, 10 caryatid figures line the walls in a sequence that feels deliberate and almost ceremonial. Each figure is unique, not in a decorative sense, but in subtle variations of posture, gesture, and facial expression. Their raised arms, appearing to support the structure above, may symbolize more than structural reinforcement. They evoke the idea of holding up a metaphysical boundary between worlds. Some interpretations suggest that these figures represent priestesses, deities, or even personifications of cosmic forces guiding the deceased into the afterlife. What is particularly striking is the sense that these figures are not static. Their arrangement creates a rhythm within the space, almost as if they participate in a silent procession, frozen in time. Without textual explanations, their meaning remains speculative, yet their presence transforms the tomb into a stage where architecture and belief converge. Perhaps the most astonishing aspect of the Sporianovo Thracian tomb lies not in its decoration, but in its construction, a level of engineering precision that appears remarkably advanced for its time and context. The tomb is built from carefully cut limestone blocks, each shaped and positioned with such accuracy that the joints between them are nearly invisible. Unlike many ancient structures that rely on thick mortar or filler materials to compensate for irregularities, here the stones meet with a tightness that suggests deliberate and highly controlled craftsmanship. This raises immediate questions about the tools and techniques available to the builders. There is little archaeological evidence indicating the use of advanced metal instruments capable of achieving such consistency. Yet the results imply a level of precision that would require not only skill, but systematic planning and measurement. The dome of the burial chamber further amplifies this mystery. Constructed without the use of modern reinforcement, it distributes weight evenly across its curved surface, maintaining structural stability for over 2 millennia. The geometry of the dome is not approximate. It reflects an understanding of load distribution and balance that would typically be associated with much later architectural traditions. Each stone in the dome appears to have been placed with a precise awareness of how it would interact with the surrounding elements, forming a self-supporting system that resists collapse through pure structural logic. This suggests that the builders possessed an intuitive, or perhaps even formalized knowledge of engineering principles, despite the absence of written records documenting such knowledge. Equally perplexing is the question of logistics. The region surrounding Sporianovo does not offer obvious advantages for transporting large stone blocks, particularly given the technological limitations of the 3rd century BCE. Moving, shaping, and assembling these materials would have required coordinated labor, specialized skills, and a clear architectural plan. Yet no evidence of large-scale infrastructure or construction workshops has been definitively identified in the area. This absence creates a paradox. The final structure demonstrates extraordinary sophistication, but the process behind its creation remains largely invisible. Moreover, the internal alignment of the tomb suggests that construction was not only precise in a mechanical sense, but also in a spatial and possibly symbolic one. The orientation of the chamber and the proportional relationships between the corridor and the burial space and the positioning of decorative elements all appear to follow a coherent design logic. This implies that the builders were not working improvisationally, but according to a predetermined blueprint, one that integrated structural stability with ritual significance. In this sense, the tomb can be seen as both an engineering achievement and a conceptual model, where physical construction embodies abstract ideas about order, transition, and permanence. When viewed through a modern lens, the Sporianovo tomb challenges the linear narrative of technological progress. It suggests that advanced construction techniques were not exclusively the domain of well-documented civilizations, but could also emerge in cultures whose knowledge systems have largely vanished. The precision observed here is not accidental, it is the result of intentional design and execution. Yet without written explanations, it remains suspended between recognition and mystery, inviting ongoing investigation into how such capabilities were developed and transmitted. Beyond the tomb itself, the wider Sporianovo complex reveals patterns that hint at a broader system of spatial organization. Dozens of burial mounds are scattered across the landscape, some aligned in ways that suggest intentional positioning rather than random distribution. Certain alignments appear to correspond with solar events or cardinal directions, raising the possibility that the entire site functioned as a form of sacred geography. If this interpretation holds true, then the tomb is not an isolated structure, but part of a much larger design, one that integrates architecture with the surrounding environment to create a unified ceremonial space. Despite the sophistication of the Sporianovo-Thracian tomb, the people who built it remain largely silent in the historical record. The Thracians left behind few written texts, and what is known about them comes primarily from external sources, often filtered through the perspectives of Greek and Roman authors. This lack of direct documentation makes it difficult to fully understand the intentions behind the tomb's design, its symbolic elements, and its construction methods. What remains is a structure that speaks through its material presence, a carefully crafted monument that preserves in stone a fragment of a worldview that has otherwise been lost. The Sporianovo-Thracian tomb stands as a reminder that ancient history is not a complete narrative, but a mosaic of fragments, some of which challenge our assumptions about the past. Its architectural hybridity, symbolic richness, and above all, its extraordinary construction precision suggest a level of knowledge that does not fit neatly into established historical frameworks. Whether viewed as an engineering anomaly, a ritual space, or a testament to a forgotten intellectual tradition, the tomb continues to resist simple explanation. It does not merely belong to history, it questions it, inviting us to reconsider what ancient civilizations knew and how much of that knowledge has yet to be rediscovered. Do you think the Thracians achieved this level of construction precision through lost knowledge, or a method we still don't understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Maymand Cave Village lies carved into the arid mountains of southeastern Iran like a silent memory that refuses to fade. At first glance, it appears less like a village and more like a natural formation, clusters of shadowed openings scattered across a rocky hillside. But as one approaches, the illusion dissolves, revealing something far more extraordinary: an ancient human settlement carved entirely into stone, still inhabited, still breathing, still alive. Unlike ruins abandoned to time, Maymand exists in a rare state of continuity, where the boundaries between past and present blur into a single, uninterrupted narrative. This is not merely a relic of history, it is a living system of survival that has persisted across millennia, defying the patterns of rise and collapse that define most ancient civilizations. Geographically, our Maymand occupies a harsh and unforgiving environment. The region is marked by extreme temperature variations, with scorching summers and freezing winters, limited water resources, and rugged terrain that offers little comfort to conventional settlement. And yet, it is precisely within this adversity that Maymand's brilliance emerges. The village is composed of hundreds of hand-carved dwellings known as quiche, hollowed directly into soft volcanic rock. These are not crude shelters, but carefully designed living spaces, often consisting of multiple interconnected chambers, storage niches, sleeping areas, and hearths. The rock itself acts as a natural insulator, maintaining relatively stable interior temperatures throughout the year. In winter, the interiors retain warmth. In summer, they remain cool. This passive climate control system suggests a deep empirical understanding of environmental adaptation, one that required no modern technology, only observation, patience, and accumulated knowledge passed down through generations. Archaeological evidence indicates that human presence in the Maymand region dates back thousands of years, with some estimates pushing its origins to nearly 12,000 years ago. Stone tools, pottery fragments, and petroglyphs discovered in the surrounding areas point to a long continuum of habitation, possibly beginning in the late Stone Age. However, despite these findings, the true origins of the settlement remain elusive. There is no definitive record that explains who first conceived the idea of carving homes into the mountainside, nor why this particular location was chosen. Thus, this uncertainty forms the core of Mayman's greatest mystery, the question of its creators. Who were the first people to transform a barren rock face into a functional, enduring community? One theory suggests that Maymand began as a seasonal refuge for nomadic pastoralists who sought shelter during harsh winters. Over time, these temporary shelters may have evolved into permanent dwellings as populations stabilized and techniques improved. Another hypothesis links the site to early agrarian groups transitioning from nomadic to sedentary lifestyles, experimenting with new forms of habitation that could withstand environmental extremes. Yet there are also more enigmatic interpretations. Some researchers have proposed that Maymand's origins may be connected to early religious or ritual practices, and pointing to certain carved spaces that appear to have ceremonial functions. The possibility that the site began not as a village but as a sacred landscape raises further questions about its transformation over time. What complicates the mystery even further is the absence of clear cultural markers tying Maymand to a specific civilization. Unlike other ancient settlements that can be associated with known empires or ethnic groups, Maymand exists in a kind of historical isolation. Its architectural style does not neatly align with major regional traditions, and its continuity suggests a degree of cultural independence that is difficult to trace. This has led some scholars to consider the possibility that Maymand represents a localized adaptation, an isolated experiment in human survival that evolved independently over thousands of years. The construction of the village itself also deepens the enigma. Carving hundreds of interconnected living spaces into solid rock is not a trivial task, especially with the limited tools available in prehistoric and early historic periods. The process would have required not only immense labor, but also careful planning to ensure structural stability, ventilation, and usability. The consistency in layout across different dwellings implies a shared architectural logic, suggesting that knowledge of construction techniques was systematically transmitted within the community. But how was this knowledge first developed? Was it the result of gradual trial and error, or did it originate from a sudden conceptual breakthrough? The absence of early transitional forms makes it difficult to reconstruct this evolution. Equally intriguing is the social structure that must have supported such a settlement. A community capable of sustaining itself in such an environment would have required cooperation, resource management, and a deep understanding of seasonal cycles. Even today, the inhabitants of Maymand practice a semi-nomadic lifestyle, moving between the cave dwellings in winter and more open structures in warmer months. This pattern may reflect an ancient rhythm of life that has remained largely unchanged, a rare example of cultural continuity that offers a glimpse into the strategies of early human societies. But again, the origins of this system remain unclear. Was it an inherited tradition from earlier nomadic cultures, or a unique adaptation developed specifically for this environment? Comparisons with other rock-cut settlements around the world, such as those in Cappadocia or the troglodyte dwellings of North Africa, highlight both similarities and differences. While these sites also demonstrate the use of natural rock formations for habitation, Maymand stands apart in its continuity and apparent antiquity, Many comparable sites were eventually abandoned, transformed, or significantly altered by later cultures. Maymand, by contrast, has maintained its core structure and function across an extraordinary span of time. This raises a fundamental question. What factors allowed Maymand to endure where others did not? Some researchers point to its relative isolation as a key factor. Situated away from major trade routes and centers of power, Maymand may have been shielded from the large-scale disruptions that affected other regions, such as invasions, political upheavals, and economic shifts. Others emphasize the adaptability of its inhabitants, whose flexible lifestyle allowed them to respond to environmental and social changes without abandoning their core way of life. There is also the possibility that the very simplicity of the settlement, its reliance on natural materials and passive systems, made it inherently resilient, less vulnerable to the kinds of failures that can affect more complex infrastructures. And yet, despite these explanations, the central mystery remains unresolved. Maymand challenges conventional narratives of human development, which often emphasize linear progression from primitive to advanced forms of architecture and society. Here, in this quiet corner of Iran, we find a different story, one in which an ancient way of life has persisted not because it evolved into something more complex, but because it was, in some fundamental sense, already sufficient. The rock fortress of Maymand Cave Village is not just an archaeological site. It is a question carved into stone. A question about origins, about innovation, about the nature of human adaptation. It forces us to reconsider what we define as progress, and whether the solutions of the past might, in some cases, surpass those of the present. As researchers continue to study its layers of history, one thing remains certain. Maymand does not easily give up its secrets, and perhaps that is precisely why it continues to captivate us, because in its silence, it holds answers we have yet to fully understand. What do you think? Was Maymand the result of gradual human adaptation, or the creation of a forgotten group with knowledge far ahead of its time? In a remote valley of northwestern Iran, where the rugged terrain of the East Azerbaijan province rises into wind-shaped ridges and ancient volcanic formations, lies one of the most extraordinary human settlements ever created, Kandavan village. At first glance, Kandavan appears almost unreal, as if it were lifted from the pages of a fantasy world. Cone-shaped rock formations rise from the earth like frozen flames, each one hollowed into homes that have been continuously inhabited for centuries. Yet beyond its surreal beauty lies a deeper story, one that challenges conventional understanding of architecture, engineering, and human adaptation. Kandavan is not merely a village, it is a living testament to a forgotten dialogue between geology and human ingenuity, where nature provided the structure and humanity reshaped it into life. The origins of Kandavan are closely tied to the volcanic history of the region. Thousands of years ago, eruptions from Mount Sahand spread layers of ash and lava across the landscape. Over time, wind and water erosion sculpted these deposits into tall, tapering formations known as fairy chimneys. While similar formations exist in other parts of the world, what makes Kandavan unique is what came next: human intervention. At some point, likely around the 13th century, though the exact timeline remains uncertain, people began to transform these natural cones into dwellings. But unlike traditional construction, where materials are assembled piece by piece, Kandavan's homes were created through subtraction rather than addition. The inhabitants did not build, they carved. They entered solid stone and removed what was unnecessary, was leaving behind hollowed interiors that would become living spaces. This process of carving entire homes out of volcanic rock remains one of the most fascinating and least understood aspects of Kandovan. The stone itself, formed from compressed volcanic ash, known as tuff, is both relatively soft when first exposed and capable of hardening over time. This property may have made it possible for early inhabitants to work the rock using simple tools. However, this explanation only scratches the surface. Carving a cavity into a rock is one thing. Creating a stable, multi-level living structure within a narrow, vertically oriented cone is something else entirely. The interior spaces of Kandovan homes are not crude or random. They are often organized into distinct rooms, connected by carved stairways, with carefully shaped ceilings and walls that follow the natural geometry of the formation. Some extend several stories high, with upper levels accessible through internal passages or external openings. The precision required to achieve this, without causing structural collapse, suggests an intuitive understanding of load distribution and material behavior that is rarely acknowledged in discussions of ancient communities. What makes this even more remarkable is the absence of visible reinforcement. In modern construction, creating a hollow space within a load-bearing structure typically requires beams, columns, or other forms of support. In Kandovan, the rock itself serves as both structure and shelter. The outer shell bears the weight, while the interior is carefully carved to maintain balance. And too much removal in the wrong place could weaken the formation. Yet many of these homes have stood for hundreds of years, surviving earthquakes, seasonal temperature shifts, and constant human use. This raises an enduring question. How did the original builders determine how much stone could be removed, and where? Was this knowledge passed down through generations, refined through trial and error, or did it emerge from a deeper, almost instinctive relationship with the material? Inside these stone homes, another layer of sophistication becomes evident. The walls are often smoothed, and niches are carved for storage, lighting, or decoration. Ventilation shafts and small windows are positioned in ways that allow light and air to circulate without compromising the structural integrity of the cone. In some cases, near entire families have lived in a single formation, dividing the space into functional areas such as sleeping quarters, kitchens, and storage rooms. The vertical nature of the structures also creates a natural separation of spaces, with lower levels used for animals or storage and upper levels reserved for living. This internal organization reflects not only practicality, but also a deep adaptation to the constraints and possibilities of the environment. Beyond the structural mystery, Kandovan's carved architecture also offers an extraordinary example of environmental engineering. The volcanic rock acts as a natural insulator, regulating temperature in a way that modern buildings often struggle to replicate. During the hot summer months, the interiors remain cool, shielded from direct sunlight by thick stone walls. In winter, the same walls retain heat, creating a stable and comfortable living environment. This passive climate control is not the result of mechanical systems, but of the inherent properties of the material combined with the design of the spaces. Yet even here, questions remain. The placement of openings, the thickness of walls, and the arrangement of rooms all influence airflow and heat retention. Did the original inhabitants consciously design these features for thermal efficiency, or did these benefits emerge gradually as people adapted their homes over time? The broader layout of Kandovan adds another dimension to its mystery. The village is built along a steep slope, with homes clustered closely together, connected by narrow pathways that wind between the rock formations. There is no evidence of a central planning authority or a formal blueprint, yet the settlement functions as a cohesive whole. The positioning of each carved home appears to take into account not only the shape of the individual rock, but also its relationship to neighboring structures. Pathways are carved or worn into the terrain, creating a network that allows movement through the village without disrupting its fragile balance. This organic development suggests a form of collective intelligence, where each addition to the village was made with an awareness of the existing environment. The origins of the community itself remain partially obscured by time. One widely accepted theory suggests that Kandovan was first inhabited by people seeking refuge from invasions, possibly during the Mongol incursions of the 13th century. The natural camouflage provided by the rock formations, combined with their defensive advantages, would have made the village an ideal hiding place. However, this explanation does not fully address how or why the technique of carving into volcanic cones was developed in the first place. Similar rock-cut dwellings can be found in regions like Cappadocia in Turkey, but the direct connection between these traditions is unclear. Did the knowledge travel across regions, or did it arise independently in response to similar environmental conditions? Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Kandovan is not its past, but its continuity. Unlike many ancient settlements that have been abandoned and preserved as archaeological sites, Kandovan is still alive. Families continue to live in these carved homes, and maintaining and adapting them to modern needs while preserving their essential form. Some have been modified to include electricity, plumbing, and even small businesses, yet the fundamental structure remains unchanged. This continuity provides a rare opportunity to observe how an ancient architectural tradition can persist and evolve in the present day. And yet, despite its apparent advantages, durability, energy efficiency, and harmony with the environment, the Kandovan model has not been widely replicated. This raises a final and profound question. Why? If carving homes directly into rock offers such benefits, why has this approach remained so rare? The answer may lie in the unique combination of geological conditions required to create suitable formations, or in the specialized knowledge needed to carve them safely. It may also reflect a broader shift in human thinking, from working with natural forms to imposing standardized designs upon the landscape. In the end, Kandovan stands as both a marvel and a mystery. It challenges modern assumptions about what constitutes advanced architecture, suggesting that sophistication is not always measured by complexity or technology, but by the ability to work in harmony with the natural world. The homes of Kandovan are not built against nature, but within it, shaped by the same forces that created the rocks themselves. They are, in a sense, both ancient and timeless, a reminder that some of humanity's most remarkable achievements are not those that dominate the environment, but those that adapt to it. What do you think? Is Kandovan a result of human ingenuity or the trace of a lost ancient technology? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Rising from the arid basin of Turpan like a fossilized memory of human ingenuity, the Jiaohe ruins stand as one of the most extraordinary and enigmatic ancient cities ever constructed. Unlike the monumental stone cities of Egypt or the marble-built urban centers of Rome, Jiaohe was carved and shaped almost entirely from earth. Yet it has endured for more than 2 millennia in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Perched atop a long, narrow plateau, flanked by steep natural cliffs on both sides, the city appears less like something built and more like something revealed, as if the landscape itself had been sculpted into a living settlement. This unique geographical setting not only provided natural defense, but also defined the architectural philosophy of the entire city. Jiaohe was not imposed on nature, and it was integrated into it with a precision and understanding that continues to puzzle researchers today. Geographically, Jiaohe is located in the Turpan Depression of Xinjiang, a region known for its extreme climate, scorching summers, freezing winters, and minimal rainfall. The city sits between two river channels that carved out a mesa-like formation, effectively isolating it and turning it into a natural fortress. This strategic location meant that the inhabitants did not need to construct traditional defensive walls, a striking departure from nearly all other ancient cities. Instead, the vertical cliffs served as impenetrable barriers, leaving only a few narrow access points that could be easily controlled. This alone suggests a sophisticated understanding of military strategy and environmental adaptation. But it is the construction methods within the city that truly elevate Jiaohe into the realm of ancient mystery. What makes Jiaohe profoundly unique is its almost exclusive reliance on earth, specifically rammed earth and carved loess, as its primary building material. Unlike civilizations that relied on stone blocks, fired bricks, or mortar, the builders of Jiaohe worked directly with the plateau itself. Structures were not merely assembled, they were often excavated, carved, or compacted from the very ground beneath them. Walls, streets, courtyards, and even religious complexes were formed by cutting into the earth and reinforcing it through a process of layering and compression. At first glance, this might appear primitive, even fragile, but yet the reality is the opposite. These earthen constructions have withstood over 2,000 years of erosion, temperature extremes, and desert winds. This raises one of the most compelling technological mysteries of Jiaohe. How did an ancient society, without modern engineering tools or chemical stabilizers, achieve such durability using a material as seemingly vulnerable as soil? Rammed earth construction involves compressing layers of soil within temporary forms, creating dense, load-bearing walls. However, the effectiveness of this method depends on a precise balance of factors: soil composition, moisture content, compaction pressure, and drying conditions. Even slight deviations can result in cracking, erosion, or structural failure. The builders of Jiaohe appear to have mastered this process to an extraordinary degree. The soil used was likely carefully selected and possibly mixed with organic materials or minerals to enhance cohesion, though the exact techniques remain uncertain. The uniformity and stability of surviving walls suggest a level of standardization and quality control that rivals much later construction traditions. Moreover, the integration of architecture with the natural topography adds another layer of sophistication. Instead of transporting materials across long distances, the inhabitants minimized labor by sculpting their environment. Entire neighborhoods were formed by carving out spaces from the plateau, leaving behind thick, supportive walls that were inherently stable because they were part of the original geological formation. And this approach not only conserved resources, but also created structures that were naturally resistant to seismic activity and weathering. In a sense, Jiaohe represents a form of negative architecture, where the act of building is achieved through removal rather than addition. The endurance of these earthen structures is even more astonishing when considering the environmental conditions. The Turpan region experiences intense solar radiation, strong winds, and dramatic temperature fluctuations, all factors that typically accelerate the degradation of exposed materials. Yet Jiaohe's buildings remain remarkably intact, One possible explanation lies in the region's extremely low humidity, which slows down chemical weathering and biological decay. However, climate alone cannot account for the precision and resilience observed. The orientation of streets and buildings may have been designed to reduce wind exposure, while the thickness of walls provides thermal insulation, stabilizing interior temperatures. These features indicate a deep, empirical understanding of environmental physics developed long before such concepts were formally studied. Beyond its construction techniques, Jiaohe also reveals a highly organized urban layout. The city is divided into distinct functional zones, including administrative areas, residential quarters, religious complexes, and burial grounds. A central axis runs through the settlement, with major streets branching off into smaller alleys. This level of planning suggests centralized governance and a shared architectural vision. Buddhist monasteries and stupas found within the city indicate that Jiaohe was also an important cultural and spiritual center along the Silk Road. The presence of such institutions implies not only religious significance, but also the movement of ideas, technologies, and artistic influences across vast distances. Archaeological excavations have uncovered evidence of daily life, including pottery, tools, and remnants of wooden structures that once complemented the earthen framework. These findings provide glimpses into a society that was both practical and adaptive, capable of thriving in an environment that would challenge even modern settlements. Comparisons with other ancient cities further highlight Jiaohe's uniqueness. While sites like Petra in Jordan are carved into rock, and cities like Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan rely on baked bricks and advanced drainage systems, Jiaohe stands apart as a fully realized urban center built almost entirely from earth, yet no less sophisticated. Despite its achievements, Jiaohe was eventually abandoned, likely during the 13th or 14th century. The exact reasons remain unclear, adding another layer of mystery to its history. Possible explanations include military conflicts, particularly during the Mongol expansions, shifts in trade routes that diminished its economic importance, or environmental changes that made the region less habitable. However, there is no definitive evidence pointing to a single cause. The city seems to have faded away, leaving behind its remarkably preserved structures as silent witnesses to a lost way of life. Today, Jiaohe challenges our assumptions about ancient technology and architectural capability. It forces us to reconsider what constitutes advanced construction. The absence of stone, metal reinforcements, or modern engineering does not equate to simplicity. On the contrary, the techniques employed at Jiaohe demonstrate a nuanced understanding of materials, environment, and structural integrity that is both elegant and effective. The city's survival over millennia suggests that its builders achieved a level of harmony with their surroundings that modern architecture often struggles to replicate. In the end, the greatest mystery of Jiaohe may not be how it was built, but what it represents. And it is a testament to a form of knowledge that was deeply rooted in observation, experimentation, and adaptation. Knowledge that allowed an ancient civilization to transform fragile Earth into a lasting monument. As we continue to study and analyze the ruins, one question lingers. Have we truly surpassed the ingenuity of the past, or are there still lessons hidden within these earthen walls that we have yet to fully understand? If you were a modern engineer, do you think you could accurately recreate Jiaohe's construction techniques using only earth and primitive tools? Share your thoughts in the comments below.